Hey guys, tonight we're slipping through a creaky wooden door under cover of dusk right into a place where you, and especially someone like you, aren't supposed to be. We're heading back to a time when taverns were loud, smoky and soaked in ale, but never meant for women. Welcome to the 18th century. You're not here to pour drinks, clean floors, or smile politely while men bellow about politics and slap tankards on tables. Nope, you're here to drink, secretly, boldly, and yeah, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your city and what time it is where you are. I want to know who's out there creeping through history with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the tavern door and the first thing that hits you is the smell. Wood smoke, stale beer, sweat, and something vaguely barnyard. A drunk man staggers past, hiccuping a tune that might have once been a sea shanty. It's loud in here, noisy with mugs clinking and men shouting half-laughed stories across oak tables slick with spilled ale. You tug your hood lower. You've dressed in your brother's coat, thick and scratchy, hoping the shadows will do the rest. No one's supposed to notice you. Taverns in 1700s England, whether in London, York, or some half-forgotten rural hole, aren't for women, not respectable ones. If you're here and not scrubbing floors, people assume one of two things: you're desperate or you're for sale. There's no space carved out for a woman to just drink. Not without judgment or worse. But you're here anyway, and your throat is dry with nerves and curiosity. You slide into a bench near the wall, keeping your eyes down. At a glance, you might pass as a teenage boy. That's your edge. A barmaid with a tray nods at you. You raise two fingers in what you hope looks casual. She slaps down a tankard of ale with barely a glance. It sloshes, foaming over the rim. It's bitter, far more bitter than you expect. But it cuts through the dust in your throat like a knife. You swallow again, and there it is, the slow warmth unfurling in your chest, spreading down into your stomach. You're in. It's strange, this world you're pretending to belong to. The tavern isn't just a place to drink, it's a court, a church, a council. Deals are struck here, alliances are made, and every story worth retelling gets passed around like stew. But for women, none of it. Outside this door, you're supposed to be churning butter or mending linens. Inside it, you're something dangerous. Not because you might cause trouble, but because you might hear things, or worse, speak. Historically, women's access to alcohol has swung wildly. There were times when women brewed more beer than men, times when women ran taverns, owned them even. But in 18th century England, the pendulum had swung hard toward exclusion. By now, brewing and drinking are male-dominated arenas. The alewife, once common, is now suspicious. Too successful and she's a witch. Too visible and she's indecent. Some women sneak around it, like you're doing now. Some disguise themselves. Others drink at home, behind closed doors, pouring gin into teacups and hoping their neighbours keep quiet. But the public act of drinking, for pleasure not duty, is a rebellion in itself. Across the room, a group of men burst into laughter. One throws his head back and howls. He sees you and squints. For a second, your stomach flips. Does he know? But he turns back to his friends, shouting something about the price of tobacco and that blasted Prime Minister. You let out the breath you didn't realise you were holding. There's a fringe story from this era, half fact, half geese myth, about a woman named Nellie Bunn, who ran a gin palace disguised as a laundry in East London. Her customers would bring clothes for washing and leave drunk. Nellie herself was rarely seen. She supposedly kept a network of girls who could get a bottle into any man's coat pocket or a flask into any sermon. No one knows if she was real. Some say she was just a cautionary tale, meant to scare women off drink. Others swear she was London's drunkest ghost, still seen stumbling around Bethnal Green after dark. The truth is, history's not sure what to do with women like you. The records are mostly written by men, and women who drank are usually flattened into stereotypes: the drunkard, the deviant, the danger. But the real picture? Much blurrier. Scholars debate the extent of secret drinking among women in this era. Some argue it was rare and exaggerated, others believe it was widespread but hidden by necessity. What's certain is that where there were men drinking, there were always women nearby, watching, serving, sometimes sipping. You order another ale, this time it goes down easier. Your face is flushed, either from the alcohol or the thrill, or both. You're eavesdropping now, catching snippets of gossip about ships and taxes, and someone named Mary who ran off with a constable. The barmaid catches your eye and frowns. She's figured you out maybe, or maybe she's just tired. You pull your coat tighter and sink into the bench, invisible again. And yet, not. You feel it, don't you? That little pulse of danger, of resistance. You're doing something simple, having a drink, but it feels like storming a castle. You aren't loud. You aren't breaking chairs or starting fights. You're just there, in a space that wasn't built for you, making it yours for a moment. Outside, the sky has gone deep blue. You hear the howl of wind through the cracks in the door. A man near the hearth begins singing, off-key and mournful. It's a lullaby, oddly enough. The kind mothers hum over cradles, but here it's drifting over tankards and tobacco, and a room full of people who assume history belongs to them. But tonight it doesn't. Tonight, it's yours. The first thing you notice in ancient Mesopotamia is the heat. Thick, grainy, dry, the kind that clings to your skin like flour. Dust kicks up with every step as you walk through winding alleys of mud brick houses. The scent is strange but comforting. Warm clay, burnt offerings, and something sweet, so almost fermented. You're not here as a priest, a scribe, or a god king. You're here as a woman with a secret thirst, and luckily this civilization, around 2000 BC, has exactly what you're looking for. You duck into a stone chamber dimly lit by oil lamps flickering behind thin slabs of mica. There's a woman there, seated cross-legged on a woven mat. Her robes are embroidered with silver thread and pomegranate dye, and her hair is coiled high, pinched in gold rings. She doesn't flinch at your arrival. She knows why you've come. She gestures wordlessly to a carved bowl beside her, and you kneel slowly, trying not to feel like a time-travelling fraud. Inside the bowl is sikaru, a honey-coloured beer thicker than you expect, bubbling faintly. You lean closer. The scent is wild, grain, spice, and a sweetness that cuts through the heat. You're in the temple of Ninkasi, the Sumerian goddess of beer, and you're about to drink from a brew that women have guarded like a sacred text for centuries. In this world, women aren't just allowed to brew, they are expected to. Beer here is divine, both drink and offering, and its preparation is tied to priestesses who chant while they mash barley and let it ferment under the sun. You raise the bowl, tentative, and take a sip. It's thick, sour-sweet, with the barest tang of something like apple skins left too long in the sun. Not exactly refreshing, but strong. You feel it settle in your chest, humming. Drinking in public isn't scandalous here. If you're the right woman, priestesses, noble women, temple brewers, these roles give you access. You don't just serve the gods, you prepare their drink, and occasionally you take a sip or three yourself. But outside the temple walls, things get more complicated. If you're a common woman, drinking in public carries risk. Not legal danger necessarily, but social cost. You're more vulnerable to gossip, to judgment, to whispers behind hands. This double standard is older than writing, literally. One ancient Babylonian law hints that women caught drinking too freely could be punished severely, sometimes even drowned. Because a woman drunk was a woman ungoverned, and that, apparently, could topple empires. Back in the chamber, the priestess smiles at you. Not kindly exactly, more knowingly, like she recognizes something of herself in your presence. She refills your bowl and begins a chant, something rhythmic and low, like bees buzzing inside a clay jar. The hymn is to Ninkasi, of course, goddess of fermentation, protector of brewers, she who fills the jars with sweetness. It's a soft, looping melody, and your head begins to sway with it. Here's a wild fact. Some scholars believe women in Mesopotamia used beer, not just religiously but medicinally. There are surviving tablets that list beer as an ingredient in healing mixtures. Imagine you've got a sore tooth or a bad gut, beer to the rescue. Imagine how many of those remedies were passed from mother to daughter in kitchens soaked with the scent of barley and heat. Then there's the beer straws. Yeah, straws, long ones, made of gold and lapis lazuli because Mesopotamian beer was often too thick to drink straight from the bowl. It had sediment at the bottom, so you sipped it like a milkshake, just, sacred. You lift your own drinking straw, wooden, worn smooth, and lean in again. Outside the temple, night is settling in. There's music echoing faintly from the plazas, harps, flutes, the patter of drums. The city never quite sleeps. Merchants trade by torchlight, and somewhere a newlywed couple is being paraded through the streets with palms full of fruit and bread. But here in this cool, shadowed room, you're tucked into a secret history of women who drank not to forget, but to remember, to honour. And yet, even in this sacred space, cracks exist. There's a strange tension between reverence and restriction. Some clay tablets praise the brewing priestesses, while others caution against women drinking too freely. One poem tells the story of a woman who drinks beer and becomes loud in the streets. Her punishment: shame, loss, exile. Scholars today argue over whether these tales were morality plays or reflections of actual practice. Did most women drink openly, or were they, like you, hiding in the margins of ritual and shadow? The priestess reaches for a small jug and pours something stronger into your bowl. It's date wine, fermented fruit, sharp and dark. You sip, and it tastes like candied flame. She leans in close and says, "For the gods and for those who dare." Her voice is smooth, worn with age and power. You feel the weight of her words settle around you like a cloak. There's no tavern here, no rowdy bar songs or shouting matches, just quiet reverence, a drink that doubles as prayer, and the soft hum of power passed from hand to hand, woman to woman. You drink not to disappear, but to be seen, by the divine, by your sisters, by yourself. You sit with her as the oil lamps burn lower, casting long shadows that flicker like ghosts of other women who sat just like this, drank just like this. You wonder how many stories have been erased, how many priestesses vanished from record because they didn't fit the neat narratives left behind. You take another sip and vow silently to remember. Out in the alley, dawn is just beginning to stretch her fingers across the horizon. The priestess nods once and disappears behind a curtain of hanging reeds. You stand slowly, head buzzing, limbs heavy. The bowl is empty now, but the memory of it glows inside you. You step back into the dusty morning, heart racing with a quiet defiance. You've drunk from a goddess's cup, and no one can take that from you. You're in Rome now, but not the grand marble vision you've seen in movies. This isn't polished Senate floors and triumphant parades. This is the back courtyard of a sprawling villa in the countryside, the kind of place where gossip grows like vines and everything smells like olive oil, damp stone and heat-wilted roses. You're in the private quarters of a wealthy Roman woman, and she's pouring wine from a slim-necked amphora while glancing over her shoulder like she's stealing state secrets. Because, well, she kind of is. You take the clay cup she offers. It's smaller than you expected, and the wine is darker, stronger, not watered down like the stuff men are drinking in the triclinium. No, this is the good stuff, aged in earthen pits and spiced with herbs. You sip. It's syrupy, punchy, and clings to the back of your throat like a dare. She raises her cup in a silent toast, and just like that, you're drinking in defiance of one of Rome's more ridiculous and hotly debated social taboos: women and wine. In early Roman law, especially during the Republic, women weren't technically supposed to drink wine, not real wine, certainly not strong wine. Maybe you were allowed a thimble of diluted grape juice at a religious ceremony, or a sip at your wedding, but wine for pleasure, for relaxation, for fun, that could get you divorced. Literally. Roman legend tells of one husband who caught his wife sipping from a wine jug and beat her to death. The judge let him go, called it justified. Another man supposedly divorced his wife for just kissing her and detecting the scent of wine. That's right, wine breath, and you're out. Now, whether this was actually enforced across Roman society is up for debate. Historians argue about the reliability of those accounts. Some think the stories were exaggerated morality tales, meant to scare women into obedience. Others believe the restrictions were real, especially for upper-class women expected to be paragons of modesty and self-control. But one thing is clear: Roman society feared the idea of women losing inhibition. And what's wine if not a gateway to saying what you really think, which is exactly why you're here. The woman you're drinking with, let's call her Flavia, because every third woman in Rome is named Flavia, is leaning close, whispering things she'd never say in the atrium. Her cousin is sleeping with a senator's wife. Her slave is secretly teaching her Greek. She thinks her husband is an idiot, and she's been watering down his wine so he can't tell. Every sip loosens her tongue more, and soon you're laughing too loudly for comfort. The olive trees outside sway in the hot breeze, and the cicadas sound like applause. Flavia isn't alone in this quiet rebellion. Roman women often drank in secret, at private gatherings and garden courtyards, at festival banquets where the rules blurred. Some had their own wine cellars hidden behind walls or tucked under kitchens. And the servants, they knew. They always knew. In fact, one fringe tale tells of a servant girl who made her fortune blackmailing noblewomen who drank in secret. She kept a detailed scroll of every sip and every name, passing it to the highest bidder when the Senate needed dirt. Totally unverifiable, but oh, it feels Roman, doesn't it? Meanwhile, outside the villa, men drink openly, lavishly. They lounge on couches, eating roasted dormice and drinking from silver goblets the size of your head. The great Roman statesman, Cato the Elder, even lectured men about self-control while polishing off an amphora of Falernian, one of the strongest wines available. Hypocrisy, your name is venom. The irony? Women in earlier Italian societies before Rome swallowed them whole were the winemakers. Etruscan women drank publicly, sat beside men at feasts, and were all depicted on tombs holding the cups. But as Roman conservatism tightened, that freedom shrank. The shift wasn't about alcohol, it was about control, the fear that drinking would give women too much liberty, too many ideas. Back in the courtyard, Flavia offers you something stronger, Mulsum, a spiced honey wine that tastes like sunshine and ambition. It hits different, warmer, bolder, like you could seduce an emperor or topple a republic. You glance around. No one's watching, but your pulse races anyway. Because even here, even now, this moment is risky. Not just because of rules, but because of reputation. One whispered rumour and Flavia could be disgraced. Or worse, silenced. She leans in, tipsy and glowing, and confides that she sometimes sneaks into her husband's library just to read his philosophy scrolls. He says women have no use for Plato, she says, rolling her eyes. But Plato never poured my wine. Now did he? There's a pause between you, filled only by the chirp of insects and the far-off clink of dishes being cleared inside. For a moment, it's easy to believe this small act, drinking wine in a courtyard, couldn't possibly matter. But you know better. You can feel it. Every sip is a choice, every shared cup a quiet resistance. Later, as the sun bleeds into gold and shadows stretch long across the stone walls, you help her hide the jug behind a mosaic screen. She smooths her dress, checks her hair, and the mask of Roman dignity snaps back into place. She's once again the dutiful matron, the obedient wife. But her eyes, still bright from the wine, hold a little rebellion. She walks back into her house with the grace of someone who's learned to carry secrets like jewellery. You stay in the courtyard a while longer, staring into your empty cup, thinking about how many other Flavias came before and after her. How many women held their breath as they sipped, caught between thirst and fear, between the gods and the law. And how many of them, just like you, drank anyway. The smell of yeast and lavender clings to the stone walls like secrets, and the candlelight flickers in halos on the low arched ceilings. You're in a convent now, hidden away in the lush hills of medieval France, where silence is law and piety is everything. At least that's the story told beyond the gates. Inside, though, there's something brewing that would raise a few eyebrows in the bishop's court. You can hear the faint clink of glass and the bubbling whisper of fermentation. And it's not holy water. You shuffle down a corridor behind Sister Matilda, her robe swishing softly, her keys jangling from a thick leather belt. She doesn't speak, but glances over her shoulder once with a knowing look. At first, you think you're heading to the cellar for some ancient hymnals or maybe a dusty old reliquary. But no, the moment the door creaks open, your nose confirms it. Hops, malt, something a little sharp. Definitely alcohol. She lights a lantern and gestures to the large barrels lining the walls. The Lord provides, she says simply, and hands you a ladle. This, right here, is the other side of cloistered life, the one not painted in Sunday frescoes or scrawled in the monastery's scriptorium. These nuns, bound by vows of poverty and prayer, are also quietly running a thriving brewery. And not just any brewery. Their beer is clean, consistent, and, dare you think it, divine. Historically, brewing was a part of monastic life for both men and women. Monasteries were centres of agriculture and production, and brewing was practical. Water was dangerous, beer was safe, and the income it generated kept the cloisters fed and clothed. While male monks became renowned for their brewing prowess, hello, Trappist ales, nunneries across Europe were quietly holding their own. You just don't hear about them as much because, well, nuns don't brag. You sip from the ladle. It's cool and slightly bitter, with a malty backbone that tastes like freshly baked rye bread. This isn't a drink of indulgence, it's a drink of survival. But it also carries something else, a glint of mischief. Sister Matilda smirks as she watches you take another sip. She doesn't need to explain. You get it. Of course, not everyone was on board. Church authorities often debated whether women, even cloistered ones, should be involved in brewing at all. Some saw it as a necessity, others as a temptation. Over time, as brewing became more commercial and profitable, men edged women out. It became unseemly for nuns to handle business, despite having done so for centuries. So many convent breweries were quietly absorbed into male monasteries, or shut down entirely. But here, in this tucked-away abbey, the tradition lives on. The women move like clockwork, lifting sacks of barley with practiced ease, stirring vats, timing fermentation with the rhythms of vespers and lauds. Brewing isn't separate from their devotion, it's woven into it. Sister Leonie, the one with ink-stained fingers and a sharp wit, tells you that St. Bridget of Ireland, herself a brewer, once turned her bathwater into beer to feed the poor. Miracle or convenient, she whispers, winking. That little story is true, or at least as true as any medieval saint tale can be. St. Bridget, one of the patron saints of brewing, is a perfect symbol of this hidden tradition. She stands with one foot in folklore and one in scripture, a woman of faith and fermentation. Her legacy is written not in sermons, but in recipes passed from nun to nun in tiny, perfect script. In the back corner of the cellar, Sister Mathilde pulls out a leather-bound book. Inside are dozens of brewing instructions, some meticulous, others scribbled like grocery lists. Next to one entry dated 1296 is a tiny ink drawing of a rabbit holding a tankard. Fringe fact, that symbol, the drunken hare, appears in several other medieval documents and carvings. Scholars debate whether it was a joke, a warning, or a brand. One theory claims it marked women-made brews. Another says it was code for particularly potent batches. Either way, you like the idea that these cloistered women had an inside joke the world couldn't quite decode. And yet, as always, the debate persists. Were nuns truly autonomous in this work, or were they supervised by male clergy? Were they brewers or assistants? Scholars argue both sides. Some documents refer to abbesses managing entire estates, directing labour and production. Others downplay their roles entirely, suggesting male oversight even in female orders. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle, just cloudy enough to keep the full story hidden behind incense and doctrine. Back upstairs, after compline prayers echo off the chapel walls, you join the sisters in their private quarters. The fire crackles. A tray appears with simple bread, soft cheese, and a pitcher of ale that smells faintly of orange peel. The nuns drink modestly, not in excess, but with ritualistic calm. It's not about intoxication, it's about connection. To the past, to the earth, to each other. Sister Leonie leans toward you and says, "You know they say women drink to forget, but we drink to remember." You nod, and for a moment the modern world feels impossibly far away. Here, in this circle of quiet power, the old rules don't apply. The cloister is both shield and crucible, a place where forbidden things can ferment into sacred acts. Before you leave, Sister Matilda presses a small glass bottle into your hand. "For your journey," she says, her eyes twinkling, "but don't let the monks see." You tuck it into your coat, heart warm, head buzzing just a little from the ale and the company. Outside, the moon has risen, casting silver light across the courtyard. You walk slowly, not ready to return to the world of sermons and suspicion. You've tasted something rare, not just beer, but a truth quietly brewed over centuries, that even in the most pious, regulated, cloistered places, women still found a way to sip, to share, and to smile in secret. The sliding door clicks shut behind you, and instantly the world is hushed, filtered through layers of soft light and even softer expectations. Tatami mats cushion your feet, paper lanterns cast a golden glow. Somewhere a shamisen plucks a slow, deliberate melody. You're in Kyoto now, deep in the winding alleys of the pleasure district during the Edo period. Sometime around the early 1700s, you've been invited to a tea house, exclusive, refined, sacred, but it's not tea you're really here for. It's sake. And if anyone finds out what you're about to do, things could get complicated. You kneel on a silk cushion beside a woman named Hanayo. Her makeup is flawless, white as moonlight with crimson lips and lined black eyes that could read a soul without asking. She is a geisha, which already makes her both visible and invisible, celebrated and restricted. Everyone wants her at the party, no one wants her opinions in public. You bow, she bows lower. And as she reaches behind the screen for the small ceramic flask, her sleeve brushes your arm. It's subtle, but deliberate. Geisha weren't supposed to drink, not openly at least. In theory, they were entertainers, conversationalists, masters of arts and etiquette. But not participants in intoxication. Sake was for the male patrons. The men laughed loudly, made speeches, toasted each other until they swayed. The geisha poured their cups, smiled sweetly, and pretended not to notice when the jokes turned crude. But behind those soft smiles was steel, and behind those sleeves, their own little secrets. Hanayo tips the flask into a delicate ochoko cup and holds it to her lips. She pauses, eyes locked on yours, and sips. Just a drop. Then she passes the cup to you. It's warm and smooth, tasting faintly of rice and plumber. The heat spreads across your chest like a quiet rebellion. You're sitting in a space that technically exists outside the usual laws. Tea houses were semi-private zones where decorum could bend, and pleasure was an art. And yet the boundaries were sharp. Women could serve the sake, warm it, pour it, but not drink it. That would make them equals, companions instead of ornaments. And that just wouldn't do. But rules have loopholes, and geisha mastered the art of bending them. Some drank discreetly, sipping when backs were turned. Others developed a kind of performance, fake drinking, smiling behind raised cups, letting the sake touch their lips but not pass them. And some, like Hanayo, just said screw it and drank anyway, with eyes that dared anyone to question her. There's an old tale of a geisha named Kiku who drank so well she could outmatch any patron. She'd challenge arrogant samurai to drinking games and win, effortlessly. Her fame spread across Kyoto, and soon men came just to be bested by her. Eventually the shogunate declared her tea house disreputable, and it was shut down. Kiku disappeared, but rumours said she started her own secret sake club deep in the woods, serving women only. No one ever proved it existed, but women left offerings of rice wine at cherry trees for decades after, just in case. Your drink is refilled, the sake is stronger now, and the conversation shifts from polite poetry to bolder truths. Hanayo speaks softly but pointedly about the daimyo who flirts with ruin, about the merchant who pretends to be noble, about how many women sit through these ceremonies knowing they could run the room better than any man in it. You nod, but don't interrupt. This is her story, not yours. Outside the shoji screens, rain begins to fall, gentle and rhythmic. The scent of damp earth drifts in. You sip again, and time slows. The sake isn't just drink, it's signal. It says, I'm here, I'm part of this, I'm more than decoration. Historically, Japanese society placed strict limits on women's roles in public, especially during the Edo period. Women were expected to be obedient, graceful, silent. Drinking, especially in public, clashed with that image. Yet behind closed doors, many women brewed sake in their homes. In fact, before sake became a large-scale industry, brewing was largely a domestic task. Women, often called doburoku or basen, homebrew aunties, were a fermented, cloudy, sweet sake in ceramic jars. It wasn't fancy, but it was potent, and it kept female social circles alive. The modern sake industry eventually pushed them out, just like beer and spirits industries did in the West. What was once women's knowledge became professionalized by men. Even within geisha culture, there's debate. Some scholars argue that geisha drinking was symbolic, a way of showing intimacy with clients, a calculated risk that deepened the illusion of closeness. Others insist that real drinking happened often, that geisha, especially senior ones, held private rooms where they drank freely, laughed loudly, and spoke honestly. Unfortunately, the records are slim. The culture was designed to be ephemeral like the fragrance of incense, meant to linger, but never last. Hanayo leans toward you. Her breath scented faintly of sake and camellia oil. Do you know why we call it nihonshu? She whispers. Because it is the drink of Japan. But really, it is the drink of silence. She taps the rim of your cup, and silence has many flavours. The hour is late now. The lanterns glow lower. Somewhere in the tea house, someone sings, a slow haunting melody about lost love and falling leaves. Hanayo pours one last cup, then carefully hides the flask again. She smooths her kimono, tucks a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and becomes once again the perfect picture of a geisha, demure, composed, untouchable. But you've seen behind the fan now, you've tasted the real story, warm and sharp and just a little forbidden. You bow deeply, and Hanayo bows lower. That's the dance, that's the cover. As you slip back into the narrow alley, the rain has stopped, and the city breathes in quiet steam. You hear a laugh behind a shutter, a cork popping, a song unfinished. And you know the truth is still alive, hidden in corners like this, in flasks tucked behind paper walls and eyes that say more than they're allowed. The smoke curls slowly from the chimney, grey and lazy, mixing with the late afternoon fog that drifts low across the English countryside. You're walking a dirt path flanked by hedgerows and stone fences, passing sheep who don't care where you're going, or that you're about to step directly into history's murkiest intersection of beer, femininity, and suspicion. Up ahead, a cottage leans slightly under its thatched roof, crooked like it's thinking too hard. You knock twice. A voice answers from within, sharp, impatient, and unmistakably female. "Well, don't stand there like a scarecrow, come in." You enter the warm, earthy world of an alewife. The fire pops, steam rises from a kettle, herbs hang from the rafters in messy, fragrant bundles. The woman before you is stout, red-cheeked, flour-dusted, and utterly unimpressed by your presence. Her name's Joan, or maybe Marjorie, or possibly Agnes. Doesn't matter, because there are dozens like her beer in this village alone. She hands you a rough ceramic cup filled to the brim with dark, frothy ale and says, "First one's free, next one you earn." You sip, and immediately it's stronger than anything you've tasted so far on this journey. Smoky, nutty, with the ghost of something herbal, nettles maybe. Rosemary? You're not sure, but it hits fast. Joan grins. You'll sleep like the dead tonight, or not at all. This is 14th century England, where ale isn't a luxury, it's life. Safer than water, consumed with every meal and brewed in every home. And for centuries, women have been the ones doing the brewing. Alewives like Joan were a common sight in villages, selling their batches out of front rooms and wooden stalls, usually marked with a broom or a pole stuck out above the door. Sound familiar? Yeah, we'll come back to that. You help stir the mash, watching as Joan adds fistfuls of dried herbs and sprinkles in yeast like she's feeding a baby bird. It's not glamorous work. It's hot, heavy, and messy. But it pays. In some cases it pays well, which unfortunately is where the trouble begins. The moment alewives became too successful, whispers started. People don't like it when women turn domestic skills into real income. Suddenly Samir. Joan's ale is too strong, her business unfeminine, and her brew suspiciously unnatural. Maybe she's using strange herbs. Maybe she talks to herself when she stirs. Maybe she knows when a child will get sick before he does. Maybe, just maybe, she's a witch. And there it is. By the late medieval period, alewives began to be portrayed in popular media as grotesque cackling hags, toothless, hunched, greedy. Ballads and woodcuts painted them with warts, wild hair, and long, crooked noses. They were accused of cheating customers, adding hallucinogenic herbs, or praying to strange spirits during the fermentation process. Never mind that brewing had always involved ritual, or that the tools, cauldrons, brooms, pointy hats to keep the sun out, were just practical items. They were recast as symbols of danger, of evil. Fringe fact? Some historians argue that the modern image of the Halloween witch, broomstick, bubbling cauldron, black cat, has roots in the alewife stereotype. The pointy hat was supposedly worn at markets to stand out in the crowd. The cat, kept for chasing mice away from grain stores. The broom over the door, a sign that ale was ready. But as the brewing industry became more centralised and male-dominated, those signs turned sinister. Male guilds pushed women out. Laws made it harder for them to sell. And slowly, the public turned on them. Joan doesn't care about any of that. Not yet. She's too busy brewing. But she knows what people say. Her voice drops low as she tells you about the widow in the next town over, who had her whole stock dumped in the river by drunk farmers who claimed it was cursed. Or the girl caught selling batches laced with hemlock, not out of malice, but because she couldn't read and thought it was sage. She turns back to the fire, silent for a long moment, then says, "They want the drink, they just don't want to remember who made it." And she's right. By the 1500s, alewives are rapidly disappearing, guilds take over. Brewing becomes a regulated trade, and women without family backing or official apprenticeships are shut out. What was once women's work is now a business, and women, especially poor women, are no longer welcome in the brewhouse. The image of the independent, profitable alewife is replaced by suspicion, mockery, and fear. You look around Joan's kitchen again, at the drying herbs, the fire-warmed walls, the neat rows of empty jugs ready to be filled, and it hits you just how much has been lost. Not just recipes or rituals, but whole lives, whole legacies. Joan doesn't know she's part of the last wave. She just wants to keep the ale from boiling over. As the sky darkens and the fire settles into a soft glow, she pulls out a small jug and pours one final cup. "This one's special," she says, "for dreaming." You drink. It's sweeter, gentler, with notes of clove and maybe something floral. It makes your limbs heavy, and your thoughts float just above your head. You ask if she ever drinks alone. Joan shrugs. "I drink with ghosts," she says. "They're better company than the bishop." That night you lie on a straw-stuffed mattress under a wool blanket that smells of smoke and thyme. You hear the wind outside, the soft bleat of sheep, and the creak of the alewife's floorboards. Somewhere a cat yowls. Somewhere a woman stirs a pot and wonders if tomorrow she'll still be safe. The fire burns low. The air is thick with sleep. You close your eyes, and for a moment you swear you see a broom over the door, silhouetted against the moon. You're laced up so tight you can barely breathe. But that's kind of the point. You tug the beaded headband down over your curls, swipe on one more dab of rouge, and check yourself in the mirror. Just a quick glance to make sure you still look like the kind of girl who could walk through the front door of a bakery, knock twice on the flour bin, and be escorted downstairs into the most illegal party in town. Welcome to 1926, darling. The gin's in the sink, the jazz is on fire, and you're a woman who's just learned how to drink without asking permission. Outside, the sidewalks of Chicago, or maybe New York, or even a tiny town in Kansas with more ambition than sense, are quiet, too quiet. Prohibition has sunk its claws into the country, and everything alcoholic is supposed to be shut down, dried up, forgotten. But you push open that bakery door and smell yeast, butter, and something sharper, something like danger if danger came in a cut-glass decanter. You tap twice. A boy no older than 15 glances at your shoes, nods, and motions for you to follow. You descend a narrow staircase into a world lit with electric bulbs and desperation. The music is loud, the smoke is thicker than lies. And the women? They're everything they're not supposed to be. You blend right in. They're wearing drop-waist dresses and illegal smiles, smoking with one hand and holding forbidden cocktails in the other. No one's pretending to be demure, no one's whispering. This is a speakeasy, and the only rule here is don't get caught. You make your way to the bar, made from what looks like an old church pew, and order a gin Ricky. The bartender winks, pulls out a bottle from beneath a stack of hymnals and mixes it fast. You take your first sip, and it tastes like rebellion spiked with lime. During Prohibition from 1920 to 1930, the federal government outlawed the production, sale, and transportation of alcohol. It was supposed to be the final step in moral progress, a purification of society. But instead it handed the country over to bootleggers, gangsters, and, as it turns out, women with nothing left to lose. Before this, respectable women didn't drink in public. Maybe a sherry at a party, sure, but not at bars and never at saloons. But now, with the saloons closed and replaced by underground clubs, the rules shifted. Suddenly the only entrance requirement was audacity. You take your drink and slide into a corner booth with a group of women who look like they've been here since sundown. One of them, Gloria, explains that she used to be a schoolteacher, but after 2 drinks and a Charleston lesson, she realised she hated chalkboards and loved gin. Another, Louise, leans in and tells you she's married to a pastor. "He thinks I'm at a Bible study," she whispers, winking. "Technically, I'm in a basement. We both win." These women aren't just drinking, they're transforming. Prohibition gave them a paradoxical freedom. Since everything was illegal anyway, who cared if women drank alongside men? The social rules collapsed. For the first time in American history, you could walk into a club, order a cocktail, and no one would look twice. In fact, some clubs wanted women there. They brought style, they brought drama, they brought customers. A flapper at the piano meant the place had class, even if the liquor tasted like lighter fluid. Fringe fact, some of the best bootleggers in the business were women. They could hide bottles in baby carriages, sew flasks into corsets, or simply flirt their way past cops too embarrassed to do a proper search. There was even a woman known only as the Iron Matron, who ran rum across the Great Lakes dressed as a nun. No one ever caught her, probably because she looked like she'd bless you, and then drown you in the baptismal font if you ask questions. You sip again, the music swells, a trumpet cuts through the air like a knife, and suddenly everyone is dancing. The floor bounces under your feet. You don't know the steps, but no one cares. This isn't about perfection. It's about presence, about being seen and heard in a world that tried very hard to keep women quiet and dry. But of course, not everyone was thrilled about this. Reformers warned that women who drank during Prohibition were morally collapsing, destroying their families, becoming corrupted by city life and jazz and short skirts. Newspaper columns sneered about cocktail wives and liquor-mouthed girls. There were real fears that the country was becoming ungovernable, not because of the gangsters, but because the ladies stopped asking for permission. Historians still argue about this. Some say women were just reacting to a rare window of opportunity, stepping through it before it closed again. Others argue that Prohibition was a foundational shift, changing gender dynamics permanently. Whatever the truth, one thing's clear: women didn't wait to be invited to the bar, they just built their own underground. Back at your table, someone slides over a new drink, deep red, sweet, and poured into a coupe glass that catches the light like stained glass. It's a Mary Pickford named after the film star. She supposedly drank it on set while pretending it was juice. A little white lie to keep the censors happy. You're warm now, buzzing with sugar and gin and stories. A woman takes the stage with a voice like smoke and velvet. She sings about lost love and found lipstick, and everyone goes still. You watch the men melt. You watch the women straighten up. In this moment, she owns them all. Eventually, the music softens and the crowd thins. You slip out the back entrance past crates of empty bottles hidden under sacks of flour. The night air hits you like a slap, cold and sober. But you're different now. You've danced in the dark and drunk from a glass they swore you couldn't touch. And the best part? You didn't have to ask anyone's permission. As you walk down the alley, heels clicking, you glance back once. The door's already closed. The sign says closed for renovation. But you know the truth. Inside, the band's still playing. The drinks are still flowing. And somewhere a woman just poured her first illegal cocktail, tilted her chin and grinned. The air is thick with the scent of cardamom and tobacco smoke. You pull your shawl tighter around your shoulders, step off the cobbled street, and duck beneath a heavy velvet curtain. The light changes instantly, softer, amber-tinted, warm like late afternoon sun filtered through honey. Welcome to Constantinople, somewhere in the late 1600s. The empire is Ottoman. The rules are many, and right now you're trespassing. You're in a coffee house. The room hums with quiet energy. Men in embroidered robes recline on cushions, sipping from tiny porcelain cups and arguing over poetry, trade, and the newest political scandal. The scent of strong coffee curls upward from brass sesves perched over hot coals. There's music in the background, maybe a ney flute, maybe just the rhythm of spoons stirring sugar. Everything about this space says, this is where minds meet, where talk matters. And absolutely, unquestionably, this is not a place for women. You shouldn't be here. No woman should. Coffee houses in the Ottoman Empire were public male-only spaces. They were places where men escaped the watchful eyes of family, employers, even the law. They were loud, sometimes raucous, sometimes dangerously political. Inside these walls, sultans were criticized, poems were sharpened like knives, and revolts were casually dreamed up over thick black brews. For women, the line wasn't just social, it was spatial. The very layout of the city said it plainly. Women belonged in the home, coffee houses were for the public man, but here you are, sitting low in the corner, face half hidden by your scarf. You nod politely to the boy who brings you a cup. He's too surprised to say anything. Maybe he thinks you're a foreigner or someone's sister sent to collect a husband. Whatever he thinks, he sets the coffee down with trembling fingers and disappears fast. The cup is impossibly small, but the liquid inside is dense, rich, and slightly bitter. You take a sip, and it wakes up parts of your brain that haven't stirred in days. Here's the strange thing. Coffee came to the Ottoman world through Yemen, where it was first used by Sufi mystics for late-night prayer. And in many early records, women were present, drinking, talking, sharing. But as coffee became a cultural force, something tied to male identity, political thought, and public life, it was cordoned off. Men took it, made it theirs, and locked the doors behind them. But of course, women don't stay locked out for long. In wealthier households, women built their own version of the coffee house, gathering in salons and private rooms to sip together away from male eyes. Sometimes it was part of the hammam ritual, bathing, gossiping and coffee. Other times it was after the evening prayers, when the house quieted and the men were elsewhere. Women brought out ornate cups, slow brewed the coffee, passed sweets and talked. And talked, that's the part no one liked. Because while men feared what was said in coffee houses, spies sometimes posed as waiters, there was something even more unsettling about the idea of women doing the same behind closed doors. Especially married women, especially literate ones. In fact, there's a fringe case from 1664 of a nobleman who tried to divorce his wife not for adultery but for drinking coffee. He claimed it made her disobedient. The court sided with her, for once, but the message lingered. Women drinking coffee, especially alone or with other women, was seen as dangerous, not because of the caffeine, but because of the freedom. You glance around the room, a group of men nearby are deep in debate, voices rising and falling like waves. One of them quotes Rumi, another scoffs, another reaches for the backgammon board, as if it'll help him win the argument by sheer distraction. You sip again, heart racing, not from the coffee, but from the simple fact that you're still here, that no one has forced you out, yet. Back in the private homes, the coffee is different, softer, often flavoured with spices or rosewater. Sometimes women added ambergris, muska, or even crushed pearls to the grounds. It wasn't just a drink, it was a mood, a ritual, a rebellion in miniature. And once the coffee was poured, the stories began. Affairs, marriages, complaints about in-laws, dreams of travel, quiet moments of poetry recited over sugar cubes. These were the unrecorded conversations, the ones that history mostly skipped because no one thought to listen behind the latticed screens. And yet, here you are, trying to hear them. There's an ongoing debate among scholars. How much did women really participate in the coffee culture of the Ottoman Empire? Some argue that women were excluded from the beginning, others that they carved out powerful social spaces that just weren't documented. The truth probably lies, as always, somewhere hidden in the cushions, behind the door screens, between the sips. You're not just sipping a stimulant, you're tasting a whole system of power and permission. You finish your cup and set it down, careful not to clink it too loudly. The boy returns, eyes wide, and offers to clear it. You shake your head and give him a coin, more than the cost of the coffee. He bows, confused but grateful. As he walks away, you hear one of the men mutter something under his breath. You catch the word shameless. Maybe he's talking about you, maybe not. You stand slowly, adjusting your scarf so it covers more of your face. As you move toward the curtain, a few heads turn. No one stops you. They're too stunned, or too polite, or too afraid of what it might mean if they did. Outside, the sun has dipped low behind the domes and minarets. The call to prayer rises like smoke through the air. You breathe in deeply, the scent of spice and ash and freedom brewed under pressure. You're not supposed to be here, but you came anyway. And in your pocket, a small tin of finely ground beans wrapped in silk. A souvenir from the edge of what's allowed. The air is sharp, brisk with salt and the cold bite of the North Sea, and your boots crunch against frozen grass as you make your way toward a longhouse on the edge of a fjord. You pull your cloak tighter and glance up at the sky, streaks of pink and silver like war paint across the horizon. You're somewhere in what will one day be Norway around 900 CE, in the land of the Norse, where the rules are simple: fight, feast, die gloriously. But tonight, you're not here to die, you're here to drink, which, depending on who notices, might get you killed anyway. The longhouse looms ahead, timber walls, a sloped roof, smoke slipping out from a central vent. Inside, you hear the rhythmic clatter of tankards and a low roar of voices rising and falling like waves. You pause at the threshold. Technically, you don't belong here. You're not a warrior, you're not a man, you're not expected at this kind of feast unless you're serving food or patching wounds. But you've got a trick up your sleeve, or rather, in your sleeves. You're dressed in a borrowed tunic, a fur-lined cloak, and a helmet that sits low over your face. No one's paying attention to anyone sober tonight anyway. You step inside. The warmth hits first. Fire roaring in the central hearth, roasting meat crackling on spits. The scent of charred wood and sweat and ale thickens the air. The hall is lit with flickering torches and lined with benches where men, massive, hairy, battle-bruised, drink from carved wooden mugs and curved animal horns. You pick your way to the back, avoiding eye contact, and take a seat. A serving girl swings past and slams a horn in front of you. It's full of mead, golden, rich, faintly sweet with a sting of fermentation. You raise it carefully. Mead is the lifeblood of Viking celebrations, a fermented mix of honey, water, and sometimes herbs or fruit. This batch is strong. It hits your bloodstream fast, warming your face and clouding your thoughts just enough to dull the danger of sitting in a room where one wrong word could earn you a blade to the ribs. And yet, you stay. Here's what history forgets to shout from the longhouse rooftops. Norse women did drink. They drank at home, during festivals, and sometimes even at feasts like this one, though not always as equals. The image of the mead-pouring woman is legendary in Viking lore. The skollkona, the cupbearer, passed horns of mead to warriors, often dressed in elaborate gowns with braided hair and iron necklaces. She was a symbol of hospitality, but also of control. Who poured the mead when it was poured, and to whom, it all carried weight. And in some sagas, those women held more power than anyone dared admit. There's a shield maiden, for example, in the Hervera saga, who not only rides into battle but sits at feasts, drinking beside men, arguing loudly about war and honour. Then there's Freydis, sister of Leif Erikson, who according to one account fought off attackers in Vinland while pregnant and barefoot, then drank from a horn in the aftermath like it was Tuesday. Of course, scholars debate whether these women were exceptions, exaggerations or symbols, but even if they were myths matter. They show what people imagined women could be, strong, drunk and unafraid. Back in the longhouse, the man next to you slams his mug down and shouts something about a dead horse and an unfair duel. Everyone laughs. You laugh too, a little too loudly, and he claps you on the back so hard you almost lose your horn. The mead sloshes, but you manage to sip again, sweet but sharp. Like secrets hidden in honey. You spot another woman across the room. She's not disguised. Her hair is unbound, her sleeves rolled, and she's drinking straight from a tankard with no shame. The men around her barely notice. They're too deep in their own cups. She catches your eye and raises her drink. You raise yours back. There's a moment there. A flicker of mutual recognition. You're both here, both bending the rules, both daring the gods to notice. The fire roars higher. Someone starts singing. A war song, deep and low, about ships lost at sea and lovers waiting with knives. The whole hall joins in and the sound vibrates in your bones. You drink again. Your thoughts loosen, spinning back to stories of Valkyries offering mead to the dead in Valhalla. Not just servers, choosers of the slain, women who decided who lived, who died, and who got to drink forever. But even in this world of axes and sagas, there's tension. As Christianity creeps in over the next few centuries, women's roles shift. Drinking becomes more regulated, especially for women. Power closes in. The longhouse is replaced by the chapel, the feast by the fast. The myths are softened, the women in them rewritten. The ones who drank beside men become dangerous, or invisible. Some say mead itself was a gift from the gods, stolen from dwarves and hidden in secret places. Others say that it was brewed by wise women, the keepers of ancient herbs and stories. Scholars argue over who made it first, men in mead halls or women in smoky kitchens. One thing is clear. Whoever brewed it, women drank it. Sometimes openly, sometimes in secret, but always with purpose. A man across the table tries to start a drinking contest. You beg off. He narrows his eyes, shrugs, and moves on. You've had enough for now. You've seen enough. As the night grows louder and the hall fills with smoke and song, you slip outside. The cold bites again, clean and bracing. You breathe in deeply. The stars above the fjord blaze cold and distant, indifferent to your disguise. You walk toward the edge of the cliff where the wind howls and the sea hammers the shore. In your hand, the horn still clings to the warmth of the mead. You hold it up in a private toast, not to gods, not to warriors, but to the women who drank here before you, the ones who laughed too loudly, poured their own damn drinks, and dared to be more than a footnote in a saga. It's morning, but the sky looks like it's still deciding whether or not to let the sun through the mist. You're ankle-deep in wet heather, weaving your way along a narrow path that snakes through the hills of the Scottish Highlands. The air is sharp with peat smoke and damp wool, and somewhere in the distance a sheep bleats with the kind of voice that suggests existential dread. You tug your shawl tighter and keep going. You're here to find something secret, something illegal, and most definitely brewed. Because while men got the distilleries, women got the hills, and they didn't waste them. You round a bend and finally spot it, a small croft tucked between rocks, half hidden by gorse and fog. Smoke trickles out of the chimney, and beside the door sits a woman with her sleeves rolled up and soot on her cheeks. She doesn't look surprised to see you. In fact, she doesn't even look up. She's too busy cleaning what appears to be a copper still disguised under a pile of fishing nets and wool blankets. "Hope you didn't come looking for tea," she mutters. You shake your head. "Good," she says, and finally grins. "Then you best come in and mind the goat." Inside the croft, it's low-ceilinged and warm, lit by a single oil lamp and the orange glow of a peat fire. Barrels line the wall. Jars of herbs crowd every shelf. And in the back corner, hidden behind a stack of firewood, is a small gleaming still. It looks like a teapot that's made a lot of bad decisions. The woman, let's call her Mary, pours you a dram of something that smells like fire, honey, and a dare. You raise it to your lips and brace yourself. It burns, immediately, in the best possible way. It rolls down your throat and flares out through your chest, and suddenly you feel warmer, taller, maybe even invincible. "First sip's always like fighting a dragon," Mary says, laughing. "Second one's like riding it. You've just tasted uisgebeerte, water of life, what the rest of the world will one day call whiskey. And out here, far from the eyes of tacksmen and soldiers, Highland women have been distilling it in secret for generations, not just helping, not just watching, making it, selling it, smuggling it, all while pretending not to. In the 18th and the early 19th centuries, distilling whiskey without paying tax was technically treason. The British government had slapped heavy excise taxes on spirit production, and Highland communities, still smarting from the aftermath of the Jacobite rebellions, weren't exactly eager to play along. So they didn't. And because the hills were steep and the roads were terrible, and the excisemen were usually drunk or lost, no, the illegal stills thrived. And at the heart of many of them were women like Mary. They weren't just stirring the mash, they were fermenting, distilling, tasting, packing and hiding the goods in hollowed-out loaves of bread or underlayers of peat. If the authorities came knocking, the still would be buried, or dismantled, or disguised as a butter churn. There's a story about a woman who used to lower her still into a pond at the first sign of trouble, and fish it back out later like it was part of her Sunday laundry. One of the more peculiar, and possibly true tales is about a woman named Jenny McGregor, who trained her sheep to lie down over hidden barrels of whiskey. The logic? Even if the excisemen came stomping around, they wouldn't think it was to move a peacefully napping sheep. Whether or not it worked consistently is up for debate, but the image is unbeatable. Government men standing in a field scratching their heads, while Jenny sips a dram and her flock sits innocently atop a gold mine. Of course, none of this was safe. If caught, women could lose everything, their home, their income, even their freedom. But the risk wasn't just about defying the law, it was about survival. With men often working far afield or away in war, women had to take control of the household economy, and whiskey, especially good, strong, hidden whiskey, was a reliable currency. It bought flour, fixed roofs, even paid off the occasional well-placed bribe. You glance around Mary's croft again. Every corner tells a story, the mismatched jugs, the cloth-wrapped bundles of grain, the pile of firewood that might be hiding something more. She hands you another dram and you sip more slowly this time. It's peaty, smoky, almost medicinal, like it could cure heartbreak or start a brawl, or both. There's debate, of course, about how widespread women's role in distilling really was. Some historians argue that while women helped, the technical and commercial side was mostly handled by men. Others push back hard, pointing to oral histories, court records, and folk songs that all tell a different story. Songs where the heroine isn't a milkmaid or a weaver, but a bootlegger with a sharp tongue and a sharper still. One Highland ballad even tells of a woman who bested 3 tacksmen in a drinking contest, stole their horses, and sold their boots for grain. And why not? The tools were domestic. The knowledge was inherited. The law didn't change that, it just made it harder to admit. Mary pulls out a small flask from under the hearthstone and presses it into your hand. "For later," she says, "when you forget how brave ye are." You nod, touched more than you expect. Out here, the world shrinks and expands at the same time. It's just you, a fire, a drink, and a woman who's dared to bend the law with one hand and stir the future with the other. Outside, the fog has thickened. The goat eyes you suspiciously as you step around it. The hills stretch out ahead of you, soft and treacherous, just like history. You tuck the flask into your pocket and start walking. Behind you, the smoke from Mary's chimney curls upward into the grey, like a signal only certain people will ever understand. You've seen the distilleries and the tasting rooms and the polite whiskey ads with solemn men in kilts, but you know the truth now. You've drunk it. The real water of life was made with bare hands, hidden fires, and the kind of courage no one ever bothers to bottle. The walls glisten with mirrored tiles, every surface catching candlelight and throwing it back in tiny bursts of gold and blue. You're in a palace now, somewhere in Safavid Persia, mid-1600s, during a night thick with perfume, poetry and secrets. Outside these walls, drinking wine is a risky business, frowned upon by law and religion alike. But inside this hidden courtyard, the scent of dates, saffron, and sweet brandy lingers in the air. And there, seated like a queen without a throne, is the woman you've come to meet. She doesn't rise when you approach. She lifts her cup instead, a delicate crystal goblet filled with deep red Shirazi wine. You're late, she says, her voice languid, as if wrapped in silk. You sit. You're already intoxicated, and you haven't even touched the wine yet. This is a private gathering, whispered about but never spoken of too loudly. The women here wear silk robes in deep jewel tones, their hair oiled and loose, their eyes lined with kohl. Laughter ripples like water. A musician plucks a tatar in the corner, and the rhythm makes your fingers tap against the embroidered cushion. A servant passes with a silver tray of pomegranate seeds, fresh mint, and glasses chilled with river ice. You take one, and it's filled before you even finish blinking. This is Persia under the Safavids, a dynasty officially bound to Shia Islam, where the Qur'an's prohibitions on alcohol stand firm, but where the reality was much more complicated. The court drank, the poets drank, even some of the clerics drank, in secret or by stretching the meanings of verses until they fit their desires. And women? They drank too. Quietly, carefully, boldly, especially women of the court. You sip. The wine is sweet and dense, almost syrupy. It tastes like forbidden fruit and long summers. And suddenly, Rumi's verses make a whole lot more sense. Persian poetry has always been drenched in wine, sometimes literal, sometimes metaphorical. Lines about the cup-bearer and ruby lips and sweet intoxication flood the pages of Hafiz, Khayyam, and Septiyuddin Sadi. For centuries, scholars have debated whether these verses are really about wine or about God, about love or mysticism. But the women gathered here tonight aren't interested in metaphors. Their cups are real, and their laughter is louder than the risk. Your hostess, let's call her Yasemin, leans toward you and murmurs, "Do you know how many rules a woman must break just to taste her own life?" She drinks again, unbothered, as though she's not seated in a palace that could swallow her whole if the wrong person found out. It's easy to assume that all Islamic societies enforce total prohibition. But the historical record tells a more nuanced story. In Safavid Persia, alcohol wasn't publicly endorsed, but it was certainly consumed, especially among the elite. The law said no, the wine sellers said otherwise. Even foreign travellers, like European diplomats and merchants, wrote confused reports about lavish Persian feasts where wine flowed freely, though never in the official records. Women of the royal court especially had access to luxuries denied to others. Behind walls of latticework and gold-threaded curtains, they dined, danced, drank. Some were poets themselves, some were artists, some were spies, all were survivors, because enjoying wine wasn't just an act of indulgence, it was rebellion. It meant carving out a moment of ownership over their lives, their bodies, their pleasures, and doing it all without permission. There's a fringe account of a woman called Layla of Kazvin, a court dancer known for hosting illicit salons in her garden, where men and women drank together under moonlight and recited verses from banned poets. She was eventually exiled, not for the wine, but for the company. Her gatherings had become a magnet for ideas, for debates, for questions about power. The authorities could stomach a bit of quiet drinking, but thinking, that was far more dangerous. You finish your glass, it's refilled before you set it down. Yasemin watches you closely. "This is what we're denied," she says. "Not just the wine, but the space, the time to be still, the right to laugh with our mouths open." Outside the palace walls, women risk flogging, or worse for being caught with a cup. So they get clever. They mix wine into syrup bottles, they label it as medicinal, they share it at weddings, funerals, births, ritual moments that demand the easing of breath and the loosening of tongues. Sometimes it's date wine, sometimes rose, sometimes a bracing brandy smuggled in from Armenian merchants who understand the value of discretion. Scholars still debate whether these stories are exaggerated. Was wine really common among women? Or were these rare indulgences blown out of proportion by gossipy travellers and scandal-hungry officials? Hard to say. The documentation is patchy. The truth is quiet. But Yasemin and the women around her are here to remind you that where there's a cup, there's usually a story. The music swells, someone begins to dance, not with choreographed precision, but with that slow inward rhythm that comes from being very slightly drunk and very fully alive. Her sleeves float like wings. Her smile is private. She is her own audience. Yasemin pulls a small carafe from beneath the cushion and pours you something stronger. It smells like molasses and sharp citrus. Brandy, maybe, or something homemade. My grandmother used to make this, she says. Before her mosque days. Before she pretended she forgot how. You raise your glass with her. It clinks like truth. Hours pass, but you hardly notice. The wine fades to water. The laughter grows thinner. One by one, the women vanish into the velvet shadows of the palace. You rise slowly, head swimming, feet soft on the tiled floor. Before you leave, Yasemin presses something into your palm, a slip of parchment. On it, a single line of verse. I drank, and for one breath, the world remembered me. You step into the night. The stars over Isfahan burn bright, silent witnesses to 1,000 secret toasts made under mirrored ceilings and behind closed screens. Somewhere behind you the candlelight fades, but the flavour stays with you. A quiet, red-glassed rebellion that says, you are here. The walls are thin, the shutters close tight, and the fire in the hearth is burning low, but not low enough to hide the gleam of the copper ladle stirring a bowl of punch in the centre of the room. You're in Colonial Boston now, somewhere between revolution and respectability, where the streets outside are muddy with spring melt, and the footsteps of British soldiers echo far too close for comfort. Inside, however, the parlour is warm and humming, and your host, Abigail, is doing something that would get her a scandalous paragraph in the Boston Evening Post. She's drinking. You've arrived just in time. The punch is almost ready. Abigail pours a trickle of dark rum into the bowl with the confidence of someone who's done this many, many times before. She pinches in nutmeg, stirs in sugar, adds a twist of lemon peel with the flair of a magician. The whole room smells like toasted spice and citrus, a kind of domestic alchemy. The women gathered around the table, wives, widows, a spinster or two, lean in. One of them giggles, another lowers the wick on the lamp. The room dims to a cosy golden blur, and with one final stir the punch is poured. This isn't an alehouse, it's not a saloon, it's not even a tavern. It's Abigail's parlour, and it's a sanctuary, not just from the cold or the redcoats, but from the unrelenting demands of decency. Because technically these women are supposed to be tending to their embroidery hoops, or reading psalms, not lacing their tea with West Indies molasses, and discussing whether Martha Washington secretly drank stronger stuff than she let on. But tonight, etiquette can wait. The rum can't. In early America, drinking wasn't just acceptable, it was expected, especially for men. A man was judged by the size of his paw and the sturdiness of his liver. Political discussions happened over tankards of ale. Town meetings flowed with cider. Soldiers drank to fortify the soul. But women? Women were supposed to sip delicately, if at all. A small glass of cordial, maybe. A bit of wine at a wedding. Nothing that might loosen the tongue or redden the cheeks, which naturally meant women started drinking in secret. You sip the punch. It's warm, sweet, and surprisingly strong. The kind of strength that arrives in layers, first a glow, then a rush, then that strange sensation that the world is a little softer around the edges. Abigail grins. It's from my cousin in Barbados, she says, lowering her voice. He sends it in crates marked pickled fish. Nobody checks. There's a long, unspoken tradition of colonial women brewing, distilling, and drinking behind closed shutters. Many made their own cordials from herbs and fruit, technically medicinal of course, but some took it further. Rum punch, hot buttered cider, milk punches with a splash of brandy. These were the quiet indulgences of those who were told to stay quiet altogether, and sometimes drinking wasn't indulgence, it was endurance. A little nip to take the edge off a long winter, a bit of rum to get through childbirth, a flask passed around after a funeral to remember the good things in life. There's a whisper of a story, a fringe detail pulled from the corners of a 1760s diary, about a woman in Connecticut who hosted stitch and sip meetings every Thursday. Officially, it was a quilting circle. Unofficially, they were brewing cherry bounce and arguing about taxation. They toasted to independence years before their husbands did. They were never caught, because no one ever suspected the women with needles. Abigail refills your glass. The conversation has turned political now. One woman complains about the quartered soldiers, another says her husband's been hiding rebel pamphlets under the floorboards. Someone else says her son came home smelling like gunpowder and lying through his teeth. They think we know nothing, says a woman near the window, her voice flat, but we hear everything. She sips, and we remember. Scholars have long debated the role of women in the social drinking culture of colonial America. Some argue it was minimal, relegated to the private sphere, insignificant in the grand scheme. Others point to a wealth of letters, journals and court records showing women not only drank but hosted, traded, and occasionally brewed their own. There are court cases involving women selling alcohol without licenses, which means, naturally, they were selling alcohol. The legal system simply noticed too late. Abigail gestures to the punch bowl, which is nearly empty. The Reverend's wife says she never touches the stuff, she murmurs. Funny thing though, her cider jug comes back lighter every time she visits. The room bursts into laughter, loud enough to feel brave, soft enough to stay secret. And there's the heart of it, the constant dance between propriety and pleasure. These women are intelligent, informed, and acutely aware of the power structures around them. They know what they're allowed to do. And they know exactly how to twist those rules into something that fits. Drinking becomes both an escape and a weapon, a small burning defiance poured into blue and white china cups. As the evening fades, the fire dies to coals, and the punch bowl lies dry, scraped clean by the final toast. You help gather the empty cups. The women fold their shawls, pinch cheeks back into order, and return to their lives. They'll wake early to churn butter or teach Latin or write letters filled with coded words. The punch won't be mentioned, but it will be remembered. Abigail hands you a small flask wrapped in cloth. In case tomorrow is colder than you expect, she says. Her wink is slow, deliberate, and it usually is. You step outside into the night, where the moon hangs low and the wind cuts through your coat. In the distance, a drum beats. A soldier coughs, a dog barks, and somewhere beneath your feet, the revolution is brewing in cellars and kitchens, in pamphlets and teacups, in tiny acts of disobedience passed hand to hand. You walk away, flask warm in your pocket, heartbeat steady. Because now you know the truth. Sometimes the most dangerous act isn't marching or shouting or fighting. Sometimes it's pouring another cup, clinking glasses with the quiet ones, and saying, softly but clearly, we're not waiting for permission anymore. The dorm smells like chalk dust, floor polysum, and something vaguely chemical. And no, it's not just the lab down the hall. You're on a women's college campus in the 20s, somewhere between proper etiquette and absolute chaos. Upstairs, someone's playing ragtime on an out-of-tune piano. Down the corridor, a professor lectures on Latin declensions. But here in the biology lab, surrounded by flasks and Bunsen burners, 4 women in ankle-length skirts are distilling something that definitely isn't perfume. Welcome to the Prohibition-era sorority lab, where moonshine meets midterms, and women mix more than just acids. You shut the door behind you carefully. Twice. There's a system to this. 1 knock means, is the ethanol real or denatured? 2 knocks means, bring the sugar. You've brought the sugar. The head of this operation, a junior chemistry major named Eleanor, grins when she sees you. Just in time, she says, holding up a beaker of what looks suspiciously like cloudy water, but smells very much like danger. This is the era of the female bootleg scholar. While the world imagines Prohibition as men in fedoras and Tommy guns, somewhere between Al Capone and whiskey barrels floating down the Mississippi, there's a quieter rebellion happening in places like Wellesley, Vassar, and Bryn Mawr. It's in the back corners of labs, in the basements of lecture halls, and under the noses of professors who are far too busy theorizing about Aristotle to notice the distinct scent of corn mash wafting through the halls. You take a seat at the lab bench, pushing aside a dissected frog to make room for your notebook. Eleanor pours you a finger of clear, high-proof alcohol into a teacup, decorated with blue violets. No glassware from the lab, she says sternly. We're not animals. You take a sip. Tastes like fire, desperation, and very mild floor cleaner. The thing is, these women aren't drinking just for fun. They're drinking for control. For the simple act of claiming pleasure in a world still hesitant to let them take up space. Most of them aren't allowed to wear trousers, vote in some states, or even stay out past curfew. But they can ferment sugar and yeast in a dorm radiator and distill it down to something that burns. And that's enough, at least for now. There's a fringe fact here, half truth, half legend, about a group of Smith College students who allegedly built a fully functioning still, using a pressure cooker, copper tubing, and a converted ironing board. They brewed by moonlight and sold flasks to visiting male students who couldn't manage their own chemistry. One of them supposedly used the proceeds to fund a trip to Paris and became a surrealist painter who only painted cocktails. There's no record of her graduating, but her self-portrait, they say, still hangs in a quiet hallway holding a martini naturally. Eleanor leans in and whispers, "We're thinking of adding vanilla and orange peel to the next batch, to distract from the burn." Another girl groans. "It'll still taste like printer ink." "That's the spirit," Eleanor says cheerfully, raising her cup. The conversation drifts as you drink exams, poetry, a visiting lecturer who insists women aren't naturally suited for abstract thought. That one gets a round of loud, tipsy laughter. One girl starts reciting a sonnet. Another counters with a limerick that's obscene and shockingly clever. This is what intoxication looks like when it's not tied to shame. It's joy, yes, but also rebellion with a cherry on top. There's a myth that women weren't interested in science back then, that they were pushed into nursing, teaching, softer roles. And yes, the pressure was real. But many women, once accepted into these rare academic institutions, pursued chemistry, physics, and medicine with a vengeance. They used labs not just for coursework, but for experimentation of every kind. The line between formal study and private mischief blurred, and under the microscope of campus rules, they still managed to carve out freedom in beakers and boilers. The lab smells stronger now. Someone's added cloves to the latest batch. The air is thick with steam and possibility. You step away for a moment and peek through the blinds. Outside, the dean is walking briskly toward the chapel. Good, you're safe, for now. And yet this is a dangerous game. Getting caught with alcohol on a women's campus during Prohibition could mean expulsion, scandal, even arrest. Some colleges were so strict they inspected dorm rooms weekly, checking for contraband. Others turned a blind eye. As long as nothing exploded. One unfortunate tale tells of a girl who tried to use a Bunsen burner to speed up the distillation process and set her sleeve on fire. She survived. Her blouse did not. Scholars today still argue yet how widespread this underground brewing was. Some say it was rare and exaggerated, blown out of proportion by nostalgic alumni and prank-filled yearbooks. Others believe it was more common than anyone wants to admit, just hidden behind the ironclad wall of modesty that coated every public memory of women's education at the time. After all, what administrator wants to admit that half the graduating class of 1925 passed organic chemistry while slightly buzzed? You return to the bench and take another sip. The second glass tastes better. The alcohol's mellowed, or maybe you have. Eleanor raises her eyebrows. Better? Still terrible, you say, but in a good way. As the sun dips below the Gothic arches of the science building, someone starts singing a nonsense song about acetone and unrequited love. Another girl harmonizes with a hiccup. The lab glows with lamplight, laughter, and the soft, persistent hum of women quietly building their own rituals, their own rites, their own recipe for resistance. You leave the lab with a flask tucked inside your textbook nestled between notes on carbon bonds and Lewis structures. Outside, the campus is quiet. A light snow has begun to fall, soft and unbothered. You walk slowly, your breath fogging in the cold, the memory of heat and ethanol still dancing on your tongue. Tomorrow, you'll return to lectures, to decorum, to the invisible leash that tugs at every woman in this place. But tonight, you drank from a beaker that held something stronger than liquor. It held proof, not the kind you measure in percentage, but the kind you carry in your chest like a secret handshake. The road winds through birch forests that shimmer in the low light, their white trunks standing like silent witnesses to everything that has passed and everything that still hides beneath the snow. It's Russia. rural, cold and ageless, and you're travelling east of nowhere toward a village that doesn't appear on any map, unless you count the one scrawled in old ink on the back of a flour sack. It's the 9th century, maybe early 20th. Dates feel irrelevant here. The cold is eternal. So is the quiet revolution simmering in kitchen stoves and clay pots beneath the floorboards. You reach the village just after dusk. Smoke curls from chimneys. The houses are wooden, stooped, and leaning slightly from decades of holding secrets. And in the largest one, behind a sagging blue door, a circle of babushkas are gathering. Not for church, not for prayer, but for something far more subversive. Fermented conversation, warmed with kvass. Inside, the heat is almost violent. The stove roars in the corner. Layers of quilts and sheepskin make the air heavy with wool and yeast. A table sits in the centre, covered in embroidered linen and dotted with loaves of black bread, pickled cucumbers and mismatched mugs. One of the women, her cheeks permanently pink from wind or vodka or both, beckons you over and hands you a mug filled with something dark, frothy and alive. You take a sip. Kvass, the drink of peasants, poets, revolutionaries, and now you. It's sour, slightly sweet, with the tang of overripe fruit and a tickle of fermentation that hums on your tongue. It's barely alcoholic, usually around 1%, but when brewed in private, as it is here, that number climbs with every secret ingredient. Dried apples, rye crusts, sometimes beets. If you want to get bold, a splash of honey. Or pepper. These women don't follow recipes. They follow instinct. Kvass is legal, technically. But the drinking of it in this way, among women only, behind locked doors, with laughter louder than propriety allows, that's something else. It's a reclaiming. A remnant of older traditions, before the Soviet state, before the Orthodox reforms, before the Tsars even, when women brewed not just to survive, but to celebrate. Now, it's a ritual. And these babushkas are the high priestesses. The matriarch of the group, whose name might be Olga, but everyone just calls her Baba, leans in and taps your mug with hers. Za pravdu, she says, for the truth. The others nod and drink. The conversation flows like the kvass, full-bodied and bubbling. One woman complains about her daughter-in-law's dumplings. Another recounts a dream where her dead husband came back just to remind her where she buried the jar of pickled tomatoes. They laugh, shake their heads, toast again. But underneath it all, there's a thread of seriousness. These women are sharp, watching, listening. More than one of them remembers the time when the wrong word could send your family to Siberia. Or worse, you ask where they learned to brew like this? From our mothers, says one, and they from theirs. A pause. Some things the state cannot take. That's the thing about kvass. It lives in the margins. During imperial rule, it was dismissed as peasant swill. During the Soviet years, it was rebranded as a proletariat beverage, sold on street corners in metal barrels. But homemade kvass, real kvass, remained deeply personal. And it was often women who kept that knowledge alive, quietly, illegally sometimes. Because when you brew at home, you control the recipe, the potency, the gathering. There's a fringe rumour that during Stalin's purges, some women used kvass as cover for dissident meetings. They'd gather under the pretense of food preservation, pickling, fermenting, baking, and share information, hide letters, pass messages folded into recipe books. No one dared to question old women with flour on their aprons and soup on the stove, but beneath the surface they were fermenting resistance. Modern scholars still argue over the extent of women's underground networks during that era. Some say it's folklore, romanticised and exaggerated. Others insist it's real, just underdocumented, because who was going to record the babushka's guest list? One ethnographer described these female gatherings as a parallel world of memory and survival, where oral history, political commentary and fermented beverages were served together, no garnish required. Back at the table, Baba is stirring a fresh batch of kvass in a ceramic crock the size of a baby goat. She lets you sniff the mixture, rye bread soaked in warm water, dancing with wild yeast. You don't force it, she says. You let it wake up. It's hard not to draw the metaphor. These women weren't allowed to speak in public forums, weren't allowed to publish, to organise, to lead, but here in the kitchen, they lead everything. Every joke, every pour, every raised eyebrow carries meaning. And the kvass is the lubricant of memory. It makes grief bearable. It makes joy taste better. Someone puts on music, a scratchy old record of a folk song about lost cows and found love, and soon the women are dancing, slowly at first, then with abandon. Their shawls fly, their feet stomp. The floor creaks dangerously. You're pulled in before you can protest, spinning between elbows and cackling laughter. Kvass sloshes. Someone shouts for more pickles. Eventually the dancing slows. The fire dies down. The kvass is mostly gone. Baba hands you a small jar wrapped in linen. For the road, she says, so you don't forget what life tastes like. You step out into the snow. The birch trees are still there, watching, whispering. You tuck the jar into your coat and begin the walk back, warmed not by the drink alone, but by the knowledge that somewhere in every village, every cold corner of this vast, weary country, a group of women is still raising a glass to survival, and doing it quietly enough to stay free. The air tastes like anise and smoke, and your fingertips stick faintly to the velvet armrest of the chaise longue you've somehow ended up on. Welcome to a Paris salon in the late 19th century. A hazy, decadent pocket of time suspended somewhere between the Impressionists and the Revolution that still simmers in the bones of this city. Everything here is a little too intense, the perfume, the opinions, the alcohol. And the woman reclining across from you, framed in candlelight and cigarette smoke, is pouring another glass of something green and dangerous into your cup. Absinthe. Don't sip too fast, she says, unless you want to see God. Or worse, your own thoughts. She's half-dressed in a silk robe and a crown of loose hairpins. Her name might be Delphine, or maybe she just likes the way it sounds. She has the posture of a woman who has long stopped caring what anyone expects of her. Around her, the room pulses with artists, poets, and women who could quote Baudelaire as easily as they could ruin your entire evening with a single look. There's no music, but the clinking of glasses and the low hum of argument fills the air like static. You glance at your glass. The absinthe is cloudy now, diluted with chilled water that's been slowly dripped through a slotted spoon resting over the rim. A sugar cube dissolves beneath it. The green fades to a ghostly jade, and the scent is all herbs. Fennel, wormwood, maybe mint, maybe madness. You take a cautious sip. It's sweet at first, then sharp. Bitter in a way that makes your teeth buzz. It doesn't hit like wine or rum. Absinthe creeps. It sits in your mouth and unfurls in your brain like ivy, slow and invasive. And in salons like this one, it's more than just a drink. It's a passport. Women weren't supposed to drink absinthe. Or more accurately, they weren't supposed to want to. This wasn't a polite lady's sherry. This was the drink of the damned, of bohemians, degenerates and painters who hadn't sold a canvas in months. But that's exactly why women like Delphine drank it. Because it offered something more potent than intoxication. Inclusion. She leans over, lighting another cigarette with the stub of the last one. They say it causes hysteria, she says, but so does reading novels and wearing trousers. A man nearby snorts. Delphine ignores him. Absinthe in 19th century France had a reputation. Intellectual, artistic and deeply male. Men like Toulouse-Lautrec and Verlaine romanticized it, painted it, drank it by the bucket. But women drank it too. Quietly at first, then more boldly. Singers, dancers, writers, courtesans. Salonières like Delphine, who hosted evenings not just of drinking but of fierce debate, where women weren't there to decorate the conversation, they were the conversation. Of course, it wasn't without backlash. Critics warned that absinthe would turn women into monsters, hypersexual, unstable, dangerously opinionated. One article from the 1880s described absinthe as a poison for the delicate female constitution. Another warned that women who drank it would lose their maternal instinct, as if a single sip might evaporate their ovaries, which in certain circles sounded more like a promise than a threat. You sip again. The bitterness fades into something sweeter. You feel lighter, looser. The room starts to move like a painting, not in a hallucinogenic way, just softer around the edges. A little unreal. There's a fringe story about a woman named Solange, an opera singer here, who drank nothing but absinthe and lemon water for 3 years. She claimed it preserved her voice and made her immune to heartbreak. No one could prove she was lying. Her career thrived. She vanished just before the turn of the century, but her name lingered in the green-stained corners of Montmartre cafes like perfume. Some say she moved to Algeria. Others say she drank herself into another dimension. Back in the salon, Delphine stands and declares a toast to all the women who've been told to shut up and sit still. She raises her glass. Everyone joins her, even the man who snorted earlier. You clink glasses. The sound is delicate, but the meaning is not. There's still scholarly debate about how widely absinthe was consumed by women. Some argue it was a fringe indulgence, limited to Paris's artistic underworld. Others suggest it was more common than records show, just hidden behind the usual veil of polite society. Diaries whisper what newspapers won't. Letters describe gatherings like this one, where women pass the green fairy between them like a secret. You glance around the room, some women lounge, eyes heavy with alcohol and thought. Others argue passionately, hands slicing the air, cigarette ash falling unnoticed onto Persian rugs. This isn't a party, it's a pulse, a proof of existence. Delphine returns to your side and says, "Absinthe doesn't make you mad, it makes you honest." She lights a candle with a match struck against the heel of her shoe. You believe her. Outside, the Seine flows cold and indifferent beneath stone bridges. Inside, you're wrapped in velvet, intoxication, and a sensation that's hard to name but impossible to forget. Is it freedom, rebellion, the very early stages of minor hallucination? Maybe it doesn't matter. You set down your glass. It's nearly empty now, just a swirl of green in the bottom. Someone is reading poetry aloud from a crumpled pamphlet. Someone else is crying quietly and without shame. The room is fading, or maybe you are. Delphine leans close, eyes gleaming. "You'll wake up tomorrow and wonder if this ever happened," she says. "It did. And you were magnificent." You nod, not quite trusting your voice. She kisses you on the forehead, like a benediction or a dare, and disappears into the candlelit haze. You walk home slowly. The stars over Paris blink with cold amusement. You clutch your coat, the taste of anise still sharp on your tongue, and deep in your chest, something stirs. Not a hangover, not yet. Something else. The green fairy doesn't leave you. Not completely. She just waits. For the next glass, the next conversation, the next woman who dares to sit, pour, and be seen. The gutters flooding with something that smells like despair and juniper. A rat scurries past your boot and disappears under a broken cartwheel. Welcome to Gin Lane, London, 1751. You're standing in a part of town where time seems drunk, staggering and slurring through streets coated in grime, soot, and poor decisions. Around you, buildings sag, children wail, dogs bark like they're owed something, and you, my friend, are about to drink something that technically qualifies as alcohol, although poison would also be accurate. You walk down the alley, passing a mural crudely painted on the side of a collapsing brick wall. A skeleton in a corset holds a gin bottle in one hand and a baby in the other. You're not sure if it's satire or an advertisement. Probably both. The mood here is somewhere between carnival and catastrophe. You duck under a cloth awning and push into a narrow room lit by one crooked candle and the glare of human suffering. Inside, a woman stands behind a makeshift counter. Actually, it's just a door laid across two barrels. Her apron is stained, her face is drawn, and her hands work fast, pouring gin into chipped mugs and dented tin cups. Her name is Edith, though no one calls her that. Around here, she's just the widow. No one remembers exactly when she started brewing her own gin. After her husband died in a dock accident, she started experimenting with herbs and grain alcohol in the back room of their one-room flat. Now, she's famous on this street. Not because her gin is good, it's definitely not, but because it's cheap and it does the job. You take the mug she hands you. It's warm. That's the first bad sign. The second is the smell. Harsh, like turpentine with a sprig of rosemary trying to negotiate peace. But you've come this far. You sip. It burns straight through your esophagus and settles somewhere between your ribs like a lit match. You cough. Widow Edith chuckles, not unkindly. Means it's working. This is the height of the gin craze in London, a time when cheap grain alcohol flooded the streets and changed the way the city drank, and the way it judged women who drank. Before this, respectable women might share a small glass of sherry behind closed doors, but gin was the drink of the poor, the desperate, the damned. And women drank it in public, loudly, shamelessly, often while holding babies or swearing at constables. The moral panic came quickly. Pamphlets warned that female gin drinkers were unnatural, degraded, monstrous. Satirical prints like Hogarth's famous Gin Lane showed women so drunk they dropped their children into the gutter. There were warnings that gin turned women into witches, prostitutes, or worse, people with opinions. It was blamed for everything from infertility to moral decay to political unrest. And yet women kept drinking. because gin was cheap. In some cases, cheaper than beer, in others, cheaper than water, and it gave a kind of heat that food couldn't. It took the edge off cold rooms, crying children, and hard labour. And for some, like the widow, it became a business. You glance around the room. A teenage girl is sipping from a glass bottle with a rag stuffed in the top. A grandmother is passed out in a chair with a cat on her lap. A toddler is chewing on a gin-soaked crust of bread. It's horrifying, yes, but it's also complex. This isn't just chaos. It's survival. Edith wipes her hands and sits beside you. I know what they say about us, she mutters, but gin doesn't make us bad, it just makes us visible. There's a fringe tale of a woman known as Pego the Bottle, who supposedly made a fortune selling gin from her laundry kettle. She'd lace it with peppermint and sell it by the spoonful. When inspectors came sniffing, she'd dump the batch into her mop bucket and start scrubbing the floor. Legend has it she once fooled a bishop, 3 constables, and her own mother in the same week. Peg disappeared eventually, but people say her ghost still walks Gin Lane, smelling faintly of lye and beryl. Some historians argue that the images of the drunk, destructive woman during the gin craze was part moral panic, part class warfare. Most of the outrage came from wealthier men who saw poor women drinking openly as a threat, not to health, but to order. When women stopped pretending to be invisible, things got messy. You sip again, the second mouthful is worse somehow. Bitter, oily, with a ghost of sweetness that doesn't belong. Edith shrugs. Put a raisin in it this morning. Thought it might help. It didn't. Still, you understand this is a woman who has nothing but what she makes with her hands, her kettle, and her wits. And the gin, terrible as it is hers. She controls the recipe, the price, the portion. In a world where women own almost nothing, that matters. As the candle burns low, someone knocks at the door, fast, insistent. Edith stands, suddenly alert. She stuffs the bottles into a crate, kicks the barrel over, and motions for everyone to quiet down. You follow suit. The room goes still. The knocking fades. Eventually, she opens the door just a crack. No one's there, just the fog and the scrape of boots fading into the night. Probably an inspector or a customer, or both. She sets the bottle back on the counter. Still got a few minutes before the neighbours start complaining, she says. You want another? You shake your head. You're already buzzing. But you take the mug back to her, and she nods, not quite smiling, but something close. Didn't think you'd last through the first cup, she says. You leave the room and step back into Gin Lane. The fog swallows you instantly. Somewhere nearby a baby cries. Somewhere else someone sings. You pull your coat tighter, and your chest still burns from the widow's brew. History will paint these women as broken. Drunkards, neglectful mothers, wreckage in corsets. But now you know better. You've tasted their stories, warm and bitter and laced with the rosemary, and it lingers. The moon is high and full, hanging low over the canopy like a silent observer, watching from above as if it too knows that something sacred is happening. You're deep in a West African forest now, barefoot on soft earth, the air thick with the scent of crushed mango leaves, wood smoke, and fermenting palm sap. The drums haven't started yet, but you can feel their beat in your ribs already. There's something electric in the silence before a ritual, something that tightens the skin and draws the breath shallow. You're standing on the edge of a clearing, watching a circle of women gather around a gourd calabash full of cloudy liquid, palm wine. It's frothy, milky, tangy, and made by collecting the sap of specific palm trees and letting it ferment in gourds or clay pots over the course of hours, sometimes a day or two. It's a drink that's alive, changing every minute, growing stronger or sourer depending on the time and the air. And here, in this moment, it is not just a drink. It's an offering, a bond, a contract with the ancestors and with one another. A woman in a long-woven wrapper gestures for you to come forward. She's older, her face lined not by age but by experience, with eyes that look like they've seen both colonial soldiers and thunderstorms and know which one to fear more. She holds the calabash gently as if it contains something fragile. Maybe it does. You step into the circle, your feet brushing over the petals scattered across the ground. A soft chant begins, low, steady, somewhere between a hum and a breath. The women sway and you sway with them. The calabash is passed around, hand to hand, heart to heart. No men here, not tonight. Palm wine is communal by nature, but historically it's been most associated with men. Market scenes, celebrations, libations at the feet of chiefs. Those were the stories that made it into the colonial reports and the anthropological records. But they missed this, the secret gatherings of women, where the wine was more than drink. It was ritual, resistance, rest. One woman speaks softly as she sips. She tells of her daughter's first blood. Another tells of the mango grove that's dying. Another confesses she's had just dreams of a snake in the kitchen curling in her cookpot. These are not idle words. They are shared deliberately, under the influence of a drink that loosens more than tongues. It loosens fear. In many West African cultures, women were the keepers of spiritual spaces, particularly when it came to birth, death, fertility and healing. The role of the diviner, the herbalist, the midwife, all carried weight and often involved substances that bent the barrier between this world and the next. Palm wine wasn't just a beverage, it was a bridge. There's a fringe tale whispered among certain groups of the Three Sisters of Sap, legendary women who lived deep in the forest said to control the flow of palm sap with a single breath. According to lore, they could turn the wine sweet or bitter, safe or toxic, depending on how they were treated. Some say they were real. Others insist they were spirits, showing up only to women in a need. But one thing is certain. In their honour, women still leave cups of wine under trees, just in case weeds. You sip when the calabash reaches you. The palm wine is cool and slightly sour, fizzing against your tongue. It tastes green, if that's a taste, feral and fresh and unfiltered. Your head buzzes not from alcohol, but from the charge in the air, from the weight of eyes on you, from the understanding that in this moment you're allowed to exist completely. No pretense, no veil. There's an academic debate, of course. Some argue that women's roles in alcohol rituals have been overstated by modern retellings, shaped by a desire to recover lost matriarchies. Others point to oral traditions and archaeological findings that suggest women not only consumed palm wine, but directed ceremonies where it was central. Who's right? Hard to say. The truth doesn't always leave behind artifacts. Back in the clearing, the chant has shifted to rhythm. The drums have started, slow and hypnotic. The women's bodies move in unison, their feet stirring the earth into little clouds of dust. Someone sings a call and the others answer. The wine flows again, poured this time into smaller cups carved from gourds. A young woman steps forward, her eyes wide but steady. She drinks and is named, the others cheer softly. You realise you're witnessing an initiation, not into adulthood, but into belonging. One of the elders catches your eye and smiles. Men think we drink only when they let us, she says, but it is we who pour. Later, the fire burns low, the stories drift into memory. The wine has warmed your limbs and cleared your mind in the strangest way. Like a fog being replaced by another, kinder fog. You help wash out the calabash with river water, then sit beside the fire, watching sparks rise into the night. No one writes about this part. No one documents the laughter that follows a night like this, the kind that comes not from drunkenness, but from release, from being allowed to speak without interruption, to drink without justification. When you finally leave the forest clearing, the women remain. They'll keep singing, drinking, talking, maybe until sunrise, maybe until the last drop, maybe till someone needs to cry or confess or dance again. You walk back slowly through the trees, your path lit by the moon and the memory of voices lifted together in the dark. The earth is soft beneath your feet. Your mouth still tingles with the aftertaste of wine and wildness. Somewhere behind you the calabash is being filled again, and somewhere far ahead someone will call this all myth. But you'll know better, because you were there, and you drank the truth. The wind has teeth tonight, and the desert doesn't care that you're shivering. Sand crunches underfoot, and the sky above you is a black vault pin-pricked with stars, too many to count and too bright to feel real. You're following the flicker of a lantern ahead, held by a woman wrapped in layer upon layer of cotton and silk, her scarf pulled tight across her mouth. She doesn't speak, and neither do you, not yet. Words come later after the wine. You're deep in Bedouin territory now, somewhere in the early 1800s, but it might as well be the beginning of time. The tribe you're visiting is encamped for the season, a web of black goat-hair tents pitched low against the wind. Inside one of them, a fire burns low, and the air smells of cardamom, dry grass, and something sweet, fermented. You duck in, adjusting to the shadows, and realise you're not just walking into a tent. You're walking into a pact. 7 women are seated in a loose circle, some cross-legged, some reclined, their eyes lined with coal and their wrists jingling with the coin-stamped bracelets. There's quiet chatter, a few soft laughs, the occasional hiss of hot metal as someone pokes the fire. In the centre sits a shallow clay pot, and in it, a dark, steaming liquid that smells like dates and molasses and secrets. This is date wine, illegal by the standards of Islamic law, forbidden under tribal custom, yet here it is, brewing in plain sight, or rather, plain sight cloaked by mucants and dust and the softest layers of resistance. The woman with the lantern removes her scarf and nods at you to sit. Another woman ladles the wine into a small ceramic cup and passes it your way. You take it with both hands, respectful. The cup is warm, the wine even warmer. You sip. It's sweet, yes, but not like candy, more like overripe fruit left in the sun too long. It clings to the tongue, thick and earthy. Then comes the kick. Spicy, fermented, a heat that spreads from the chest outward until your toes forget they were cold. The women watch you closely, not judging, but waiting. You've crossed a line, now you're in the circle. Here in the harsh beauty of the desert, women aren't supposed to drink. Publicly, Bedouin tradition calls for modesty, for devotion, for submission. To both God and clan. But privately, where the wind can't carry your name and the stars won't tattle, privately there is space. Just enough for a fire, a cup, and a shared understanding. Date wine is brewed in secrecy, often by women. They crush the dates, mix them with water, and let the brew sit in buried clay pots, fermenting under blankets or tucked into shaded corners. Sometimes it's left out in the sun, other times it's aged beneath a sleeping mat. No one talks about it directly. They say the sweet drink or the fire fruit or the medicine. But they all know what it means. The oldest woman here, her silver hair braided with blue thread, raises her cup and begins to speak. Her voice is low and steady, telling a story about a woman who once drank too much of the fire fruit and walked straight into a soldier's camp, told them they looked like scared boys in too much leather, and left with a pair of boots she hadn't paid for. The tent erupts in laughter. Even the fire seems to crackle in approval. There's a fringe legend whispered in a few dusty corners about a female distiller known only as Zara the Flame, who supposedly brewed a date wine so potent it caused 3 men to propose to her in one night and a 4th to forget his own name for a week. Some say she was a ghost, others say she was just clever and patient and knew how to bury her jars deep enough that even the camels couldn't sniff them out. You drink again, and the world softens. The firelight blurs. The women begin to sing, gently at first. Old songs, desert songs, wordless and rhythmic. Someone claps, someone sways. It's not a party. It's something quieter, more intimate, a reclamation. These women spend their days obeying, surviving, negotiating. But tonight, for just a little while, they're laughing with their mouths wide open and their hair uncovered. Scholars today argue over whether alcohol ever had a place in Bedouin culture. The historical record is spotty, heavily filtered through colonial accounts and male religious scholars. Some insist it was a rare taboo act. Others suggest low-level fermentation was more common than anyone dared admit, used medicinally, ceremonially, or just to take the edge off a sandstorm and a long week of silence. What's clearer is this: women found a way. Always. As the night wears on, stories deepen. Someone tells a tale of childbirth in the middle of a sandstorm, the date wine used not just as pain relief but as courage. Another recounts the time she gave a single sip to a rival's daughter before a marriage negotiation. The girl softened. The dowry doubled. No one asked how. The woman beside you, quiet until now, leans in and says, "They think we're empty unless we're pouring for them. But this," she taps her cup, "this is ours." You drink to that. Eventually the fire dims to embers. The tent grows quiet. A few women drift off, curled under blankets, smiling in their sleep. You step outside into the chill, heart warm, head buzzing just enough to make the desert feel infinite. The moon is still watching, the stars still refuse to blink. You walk to the edge of the dunes and pause. The taste of date wine still on your lips. This wasn't a rebellion, not loud enough, not public enough. It was something else, a pact. A quiet, ancient promise shared in a tent lit by firelight and sustained by women who know how to survive when no one's looking. The lantern flickers behind you and you let yourself smile. The smoke swirls lazily, curling through the rafters of a low, round lodge made of bark and bone. You're seated on a woven mat, legs folded beneath you, surrounded by the scent of cedar, tobacco, and something you can't name but can already feel slipping into your bloodstream. It's dusk, or maybe just after. There are no clocks here, only the pulse of voices, drums, and the bubbling sound of a clay pot nestled in the hot stones at the centre of the room. The air is dense, humid with memory. You're on indigenous land somewhere deep in North America, before the borders carved it up, before the maps got smug. And tonight, you're being offered a drink that doesn't exist in any textbook. It isn't on a menu. It isn't for sale. It's for the ancestors, the spirits, the circle, and you. The woman across from you, grey-haired, sharp-eyed, tattooed across the chin with lines as old as rivers, nods once and dips a carved ladle into the pot. The drink inside is thick, a dark rust colour, flecked with herbs and root bits. She passes you a bowl made from a hollowed gourd. You accept it with both hands. Everyone watches. No one speaks. You sip. It's bitter, deeply bitter, the kind of bitterness that blooms into something else if you let it. Earthy, gritty, grounding. It tastes like the forest floor, like bark soaked in sun and storm. Your tongue tingles, your heartbeat slows, and then the stories begin. They don't come in a rush, they unfold slowly like smoke. One woman speaks of her grandmother, who brewed this same drink in a different forest under a different moon. Another talks of a time when they had to hide this ceremony from missionaries, burying the pots behind wood piles, pretending it was tea. Another, barely more than a girl, speaks softly about her dreams. How drinking this lets her remember them clearly. How they come to her in colours too bright for day. What you're drinking is a ceremonial brew, sometimes called tiswin, or balshay, or by any number of names, depending on the people, the place, the plants. It's made from local ingredients. Fermented corn, bark from sacred trees, wild honey, fruit, roots. Every nation, every community has its own version, guarded closely, never written down. These are not drinks for parties, these are drinks for passage, for mourning, for healing, for remembering the world before forgetting became official policy. For many indigenous women, these rituals were their resistance. When colonizers arrived, they targeted everything they could see: language, clothing, food, dance. But the drinks, the ones brewed in the quiet, in the woods, in the shadows, they were harder to kill, especially because they weren't just drinks. They were stories in liquid form. Women carried those stories, passed them down, shared them only with those who wouldn't desecrate them by bottling or naming them without understanding. One fringe account tells of a Lakota woman named Red Willow, who after her people were confined to reservation lands, continued brewing a sacred corn-based fermentation using the last surviving strain of blue maize passed down through her line. She offered the drink during births and deaths, and during one especially brutal winter, used it to keep morale alive when supplies failed. The drink was never named in any official records, but her descendants say the memory of it still grows in the cornfields they plant today. You take another sip. This time it goes down easier. Not because it's sweeter, it isn't, but because your mouth has adjusted. Your body too. The lodge is warmer now, or maybe you are. The woman beside you, who hasn't said a word until now, begins to speak. She tells a story of a village that drank together one last time before the Pfiss were forced to leave their land. They brewed in silence. They passed the bowl hand to hand. And they didn't cry, not out of strength, but because the drink held their grief for them. Then she pauses, and everyone is quiet again. There is scholarly debate, of course, about the use of fermented drinks in indigenous North American traditions. Many early European accounts were dismissive, either ignoring these brews entirely or labelling them as primitive intoxicants. Later researchers have tried to reconstruct recipes based on oral histories, but most of what's known today survives in fragments. One whispered ingredient here, one ceremonial context there, and even now some of those who know refuse to speak for good reason. Not everything is meant to be rediscovered. What we do know is that for many indigenous women, brewing and sharing fermented drinks was a sacred duty, a role woven into identity, community, and survival. These weren't drinks to escape reality, they were tools to face it, to mark it, to endure it. The woman who gave you your first bowl stands now and begins a chant. Low and slow, it builds like a wind through trees. Others join her. The rhythm is not for performance, it's for presence. You close your eyes, the sound wraps around you. So does the scent of cedar, and underneath it all, the bitterness lingers on your tongue. After a time, how long, you can't say, The chant ends. The pot is covered. The fire settles. The women rise one by one, some embracing, some silent. No one rushes. You're the last to leave, ushered gently out into the cold night. The sky's clear now, the stars bright and distant. You walk slowly across the frost-stiff grass, the memory of the drink still warm in your belly. You don't know its name. You're not supposed to. What matters is that it existed, that it still exists, that it is being kept alive, woman to woman, like a flame passed beneath a blanket during a windstorm, and that, for a few heartbeats, you are trusted to taste it. The doorbell chimes in a way that tries too hard to sound cheerful, like even it knows it's lying. You step into the living room and are immediately wrapped in the scent of powdered sugar, hairspray, and decaf coffee that's probably been reheated 3 times since morning. Welcome to suburbia, circa 1957. The linoleum is spotless, the curtains match the couch, and every woman in this room is pretending to be absolutely thrilled to be here. You've just entered a Tupperware party and nothing is quite as wholesome as it looks. You smile, you nod, you accept the beige cookie shaped like a pineapple ring. And then someone hands you a coffee cup and gives you a wink that says, "Don't sip too fast." You lift the cup. It smells like French roast with a suspicious hint of vanilla. You sip. It's not vanilla, it's vodka. You swallow and blink. The hostess, a woman named Cheryl with perfect lipstick and a laugh that's practiced within an inch of its life, leans in and whispers, "That's the coffee we save for special friends. You're in the middle of America's golden age of performative domesticity. Every ad tells women their only job is to make their husband happy, their house spotless, and their roast tender. Women are told not to want too much, not to drink too much, not to talk too much, which is exactly why they're spiking their Maxwell house with gin and pouring bourbon into bottles labelled vanilla extract. It's not that they want to get drunk, not really. It's that they want a moment, a little edge off the relentless performance. A sip of adulthood in a world where they're treated like children with aprons. They aren't allowed in cocktail bars unless accompanied. They can't open a line of credit without their husband. But they can fill a thermos with rum punch and bring it to the PTA meeting. And so they do. A fringe fact from a 1955 neighborhood in Ohio, a group of women allegedly formed a secret club called the Afternoon Sippers. Their code was simple. If someone brought banana bread with walnuts to Bridge Club, it meant the coast was clear and the flask was full. They rotated houses weekly. One woman, a Methodist minister's wife, even had custom labels made for her peppermint flavouring that read, "Do not overuse" in delicate script. She hosted every third Tuesday. Back at the party, Cheryl is demonstrating the latest miracle bowl, locking the lid with a satisfying pop. "It's airtight," she says, beaming, "and so are we." Everyone laughs, you laugh, and then sip and again. There's a quiet rebellion happening here, cloaked in pastels and matched china. The housewife of the 1950s was supposed to be grateful, clean, and entirely sober. Any deviation from that image was treated as failure. Or worse, dysfunction. A woman who drank during the day? Unstable. A woman who drank at night alone? Tragic. But a woman who drank in code, in whispers, in coffee mugs with lipstick stains? That woman had allies. Historians tend to downplay mid-century suburban drinking, especially among women. It's not part of the image we've built of the era. The focus is usually on men, the martini executives, the Don Drapers. But women were drinking too, quietly, strategically, socially, and often out of necessity. Domesticity, when performed under constant surveillance, requires lubrication. A researcher reviewing family diaries from the 1950s found references to evening tea and midday cordials that clearly weren't herbal or innocent. Recipes were exchanged for cookies and cocktails with equal frequency. Some cookbooks even included punches with ambiguous measurements like a generous splash or a housewife's helping. The wink was cultural. You sip again. The vodka's mellowing now, or maybe your expectations are. Cheryl moves on to the next demonstration, a cake container that burps itself when sealed. Someone in the back murmurs, "Just like my husband." Laughter bubbles up, a little too loud, a little too real. You realise in this room full of women with perfect hair and aching backs, honesty comes easiest after 2 sips. Next to you, a woman in a mint green sweater pours more vodka into her cup, right in front of a figurine that says, "Bless this home." You ask her how long they've been doing this. "Since the Eisenhower inauguration," she says dryly, "and longer than we'll admit." She tells you about a neighbour who got too bold, mixed up the vodka jug with the actual coffee and served it to church potluck. Chaos ensued. She had to move to Toledo, but even now they still write her postcards. Our Lady of Perpetual Spirit, she says, raising her cup. The party winds down, but no one's eager to leave. The cups are emptying slowly. The conversation has shifted from product pictures to real talk, about children, boredom, suspicion, longing. One woman sighs and says, "Sometimes I want to forget my name, just for one night." Another replies, "You don't need to forget it. You just need to say it out loud once with no one correcting you." The buzz in your limbs is subtle, but steady. You feel lighter somehow, not drunk, but loosened. You realize these women aren't trying to escape. They're trying to remember who they were before marriage, before expectations, before everything was beige and monogrammed. You help pack up the leftovers, jello molds, plastic lids, a few slices of pie. Cheryl hugs you at the door. "Next time, bring the decaf," she whispers, meaning the exact opposite. Outside, the street is still and perfect, every lawn clipped, every porch light the same soft yellow. But you know now that behind those curtains, in those kitchens, women are sipping, laughing, loosening the grip of perfection, one coffee cup at a time. And if the cake container ever burps, well, maybe that's just a reminder that even airtight systems eventually let something out. The ceiling fan hums lazily above your head, pushing the thick Havana air around like a tired dance partner. You're sitting on a sun-bleached couch that's seen better decades, in a fourth-floor apartment that smells of citrus rinds, frying oil, and the faint perfume of cheap rum. Outside, a slow rumba wafts in from the radio of a neighbour 3 balconies over. A rooster crows, even though it's almost midnight. Somewhere in the hallway, someone is laughing, but not too loud. This is Cuba in the 1950s, just before the edge of fray completely, and you're here, not as a tourist or a rebel, but as a guest of the women who mix their resistance with sugar and lime. You're handed a glass by a woman named Teresa. She's barefoot, wearing a dress that used to be a whole yellow, but now just hints at it. Her lipstick is immaculate. The glass is short and sweating, filled with something golden that smells like warm nights and better days. Rum, of course, but not just any rum. This one's been aged in a barrel hidden in her cousin's warehouse, flavoured with dried orange peel, vanilla, and a secret she won't tell you even after 2 drinks. You take a sip, it burns a little, then it smooths out, gliding down your throat like music, and resting somewhere between your ribs and your memory. Here, in this modest, sun-dappled room, a group of women are gathered. They talk softly, smoke slowly, and pour freely. This isn't a bar. It isn't a cantina. It's a living room rebellion. Intimate, necessary, subversive. Because in pre-revolutionary Cuba, women were supposed to drink in the background, if at all. Polite daiquiri at a resort, a single mojito at a family celebration, anything more than that. And eyebrows would rise, gossip would bloom, and reputations would wilt under the weight of disapproval. But in these private gatherings, upstairs, after the children are in bed and the men have wandered off into politics or sleep, women like Teresa drink, not to forget, but to feel, to speak, to remember that their mouths belong to them. The conversation moves in and out of politics. Someone mentions Batista's latest crackdown, another mutters about missing neighbours, but no one dwells on it. Not allowed. What they do talk about are things like which cousin just got engaged to a man who can't dance, and which grandmother swears her arthritis is cured by a shot of rum and a clove of garlic every morning. You laugh. They laugh. The rum makes everyone generous with their smiles. There's a fringe story told about a group of Havana seamstresses who, during the political unrest of the early 50s, smuggled anti-government flyers inside bundles of laundry and slipped messages into the hems of dresses. But what never made it into the official reports was what happened at night. After the flyers were folded, after the garments were stitched, they'd sit in their small apartments, pour rum over ice chipped from melted fridge trays, and toast to each other's nerve. They called it La Hora del Ron, the rum hour, always after 10, always in whispers, always together. You take another sip, this time it tastes like defiance. Historically, Cuba has had a complicated relationship with rum. It's been the country's pride and its poison, its export and its indulgence. Men drank it boldly, publicly. Hemingway drank it in buckets, his name plastered on menus and bar stools across Havana. But women? They drank behind closed doors, or else played the role of the classy lady with the slender flute of champagne, empty or otherwise. The truth, of course, is that Cuban women drank as freely and as cleverly as they wanted, just not in the spotlight. They infused their rum with guava, pineapple, tamarind. They sipped slowly, made it last. They brewed spice syrups and hid bottles in kitchen cabinets marked cleaning vinegar. They knew what the rules were, and they knew how to dance just outside them. Teresa is telling a story now, something about her mother, slipping out of the house during the sugar strikes, disguised as a man to deliver water and food to the workers. She tied her breast down with linen, Teresa says, but nothing could hide her voice. The women murmur their appreciation, not in surprise, but in recognition. They've all known someone like that. There's debate among scholars about the extent of women's involvement in the revolutionary lead-up. Their names don't appear in as many documents. Their roles are often listed as supportive or domestic, but behind the curtains, over glasses of spiced rum and bitter oranges, plans were made, decisions whispered, promises kept. One woman, Carmen, offers you a second glass. You hesitate. She raises an eyebrow and says, "You drank the first. You can't walk out with only half the story." Fair enough. This one is darker, stronger, less sweet. Carmen shrugs. "We don't measure," she says. "We feel when it's right." Outside, a motorcycle roars down the alley. Everyone freezes for a second. Teresa peeks through the curtain, then relaxes. Not the police, just a neighbour's son showing off. The women exhale, laughter returning like a tide. Someone turns up the radio. A voice sings of lost love and unrepentant hope. The rhythm is slow and swaying. A few women stand and begin to dance, not formally, not performatively, but with the ease of women dancing only for themselves. You join them, hips moving gently, arms loose. Rum singing in your veins. You don't need to know the steps, you just need to move. Eventually the music fades. The bottle's empty, the mood softens. Teresa wraps the last slice of plantain cake in wax paper and presses it into your hands. "You'll want something sweet tomorrow," she says. She's not wrong. You thank her, not just for the cake or the rum or the hospitality, but for the reminder that sometimes the boldest acts are the quiet ones. A raised glass, a shared story, a refusal to be invisible, even if the world insists otherwise. As you descend the stairs into the warm Havana night, the music plays on, soft, defiant, female. You carry the taste of it with you. The neon buzzes overhead, painting the sidewalk in a sickly pink glow. It's Los Angeles, 1983. The payphones still work, barely. The air is thick with smog, hairspray, and the slow thump of synth from a nightclub just down the block. You're standing in the shadow of a liquor store that's never closed and never cared who walked in so long as they walked out fast. And there, leaning against the wall in a silver leather jacket and fishnets, is Frankie. Frankie lights a cigarette with one hand and waves at you with the other. "You're late," she says. "You owe me a wine cooler." You don't argue. You step inside and return with 2 glass bottles, condensation sliding down the sides. They're pink, bubbly and low alcohol enough to be laughed at by the boys in the back parking lot, but not by Frankie, or any of the women like her. She twists the cap off with her teeth. "To garbage men with drum machines," she says, and drinks. This is the 80s in all its contradictory glory: glam rock and Reaganomics, aerobics tapes and economic recession. And while much of the world is looking at women through leg warmers and shoulder pads, Frankie and her friends are busy rewriting the nightlife script, one trashy, glorious wine cooler at a time. Because while the clubs downtown might be crawling with suits and saxophones, the dive bars, alley parties and rooftop get-togethers are where the real stories pour out. And women? They were drinking, loudly, colourfully, with names like Debbie, Tanya and Mo, who keep Boone's Farm in their purses and strawberry schnapps in the fridge next to Slimfast. It's not chic, it's not classic, it's not even considered real drinking by old-school bartenders, but that's the point. You pop the cap off your bottle and take a swig. It's sweet, so sweet your teeth twinge, but fizzy and weirdly refreshing. It tastes like rebellion dipped in artificial cherry. You get it now. Wine coolers exploded onto the scene in the early 80s, billed as a softer, more feminine alternative to beer and liquor. Bright, fruity, and often marketed with pastel-coloured ads featuring women in bikinis and big sunglasses, they were dismissed by serious drinkers as unserious drinks. But for women who had spent decades sneaking sips, hiding flasks, or playing the I don't drink much role, wine coolers were the excuse they'd been waiting for. An invitation wrapped in aluminum foil, Frankie tells you about the rooftop parties she used to crash when she first moved to LA. The guys drank Budweiser. The girls brought Bartles and James and didn't share. She grins. It was the only thing we had that was truly ours, that and Aquanet. There's a fringe tale about a group of secretaries in Culver City who created an underground happy hour network, bouncing from one apartment complex to the next every Thursday, with a cooler full of citrus-flavoured wine and a mixtape of nothing but Prince and Bananarama. They called themselves the Grape Escape. It lasted 4 years, 3 marriages, and 1 spectacular rooftop blackout. No one wrote it down, but the memories live in old Polaroids and slightly warped cassette cases. Back on the sidewalk, a car rolls by, blasting Cyndi Lauper. Frankie sings along, loud and off-key, and raises her bottle in time with the chorus. Girls just want to have fun was never a threat to the establishment until women like her started meaning it. Startled, someone in a passing convertible cheers. You walk with her down the block to a grimy dive called the Leopard Room. Inside it's dim and sticky. The bar glows red, the stools wobble, and the bartender doesn't blink when Frankie orders 2 shots of peach schnapps and 2 more wine coolers to go. "It's my birthday," she lies. "It's always my birthday." You sip your second cooler, letting the syrupy pink mess coat your tongue like bubble gum left in the sun. A woman in the corner is slow dancing with herself. Another is drawing eyeliner on in the reflection of a beer tap. No one's here to impress. They're here to feel, to remember they're alive. There's a kind of magic in the unpretentiousness of it all. The clothes, the drinks, the music, they don't care about legacy or elegance. They care about now, about dancing until your makeup melts, about laughing until your drink spills, about being seen, not in the refined, socially approved way, but in the sweaty, glorious, slightly drunk way that says, "I am here, you don't get to ignore me." Scholars rarely study women's drinking habits in the late 20th century, unless it's to pathologise them. Binge drinking, alcohol abuse, wine mum culture, but they miss the nuance, the way alcohol became a strange kind of tool, a way to enter male-dominated spaces, to claim joy, to bond over ridiculous flavours and fluorescent labels. Wine coolers weren't about sophistication, they were about access. Frankie finishes her bottle and crunches it flat with her heel. "I'm not ashamed of what I like," she says. "That's the whole point." You head back out onto the sidewalk, cooler buzz humming pleasantly through your veins. It's still warm out. The stars are buried behind the glow of the city, but you don't need them tonight. You've got neon. You've got Frankie. You've got a half-melted pack of gum and 1 more wine cooler clinking in your bag. And somewhere in the sticky laughter of women spilling out of bars and into cabs and onto sidewalks with their lipstick smudged and their shoes in their hands, you hear the real anthem of the night. Not some polished top 40 hit, but the simple, fizzy, unapologetic sound of women drinking exactly what they want. Even if it's pink. Especially because it's pink. The club pulses like a second heart, low and constant and too loud for conversation. You can feel the bass in your kneecaps, vibrating through the floor like some kind of underground ritual. And maybe it is, because here, in Berlin, it's 1998. And you're standing in the middle of a techno-temple converted from a decommissioned power plant with fog machines belching artificial mist into the air and strobe lights slicing through the dark like divine judgment. And in your hand, sticky, cold and fluorescent, is a glass of something electric blue and questionably alcoholic. You take a sip, but it tastes like candy and regret. A woman next to you, leather pants, a mesh top and eyebrows shaved clean off, leans from over and shouts in your ear, "It's called a diesel punkt. No one knows what's in it. That's the point." She laughs. So do you, though you're not sure if it's funny or just the drink hitting your bloodstream like a techno drop. Her name is Anja. She's here every weekend. Not for the men, not for the music, but for the space it gives her to exist without shape. "I work in finance," she tells you, louder than she needs to. "But here I don't have to be anything. Just this." She gestures vaguely to the dance floor. You both watch as a group of women, shaved heads, glittered skin, fishnets, combat boots, circle each other in a dance that's more communion than choreography. You drink again. The diesel punkt is stronger now, or maybe it just wants you to believe that. This is post-wall Berlin, years after reunification, in a city that's still figuring out what it wants to be when it grows up. The East has cracked open, the West is getting over itself, and in the cracks between capitalism and memory, clubs like this one have become sanctuaries, and women, especially queer women, have carved out their own corners in the shadows and strobes. The club scene is chaotic, sure, but also coded. Women drink in neon-lit corners, at pop-up raves in underground tunnels, at house parties where the walls are papered with Marxist poetry and someone's great-aunt's porcelain collection. They mix absinthe with cola, schnapps with Red Bull, or just pour vodka into litre-sized juice boxes and call it hydration. It's not about taste, it's about place. About being somewhere they're not told to shrink. A fringe legend floats around about a Berlin DJ collective from the late 90s, made up entirely of women who wore LED masks and served cocktails from the DJ booth between sets. No one ever saw their faces. Their signature drink, the Power Surge, was allegedly made with fruit punch, grain alcohol, and a crushed vitamin B12 tablet. It was banned after someone tried to light it on fire and ended up igniting an entire velvet couch. But their motto still echoes in bathroom graffiti. Drink loud, dance harder. Repeat. You finish your diesel punkt, and Anya's already flagging down someone carrying a plastic tray stacked with glow-in-the-dark test tubes. Each tube is filled with a different colour: orange, green, magenta. And all of them look like they were made in a laboratory by someone who flunked chemistry but aced rebellion. You grab a green one. It tastes like lime and mild panic. You love it. Somewhere in the haze, a girl kisses another girl, and no one flinches. A woman leans back against a concrete pillar, laughing so hard her mascara runs. Two strangers trade drinks, then secrets, and no one is performing. No one is pretending to be what the world expects, because in this space where the air smells like sweat and sugar and something vaguely metallic, women get to disappear into themselves. They aren't being watched. They're watching. They aren't asking permission. They're pouring their own drinks. Scholars still struggle to capture the nuance of women in club culture. They talk about overindulgence, vulnerability, even danger, and those things are real. But they often miss the quiet agency tucked between the beats. For many women, especially those pushed to the margins, these spaces offered an identity not tied to motherhood, marriage, or marketability, just movement, just sound, just that blue cocktail and the echo of bass in your ribcage. Anja leads you through the crowd to a small alcove near the DJ booth. It's quieter here, or at least the volume has dropped to a level where thoughts can survive. She pulls out a flask covered in rainbow stickers. I bring my own, she says. Club cocktails are for amateurs. You take a sip. It tastes like pine and pepper and a decision you won't remember making. The lights flash. A new beat starts. Slower, heavier. Someone screams, not in fear but in joy, and the whole floor reacts like a living thing. Anya grabs your hand. Come on, she says. This is the good part. You dance. Hard, ugly, free. You sweat through your shirt. You forget your name. You let go. Later, much later, you sit on a curb outside while the sky starts to pinken with morning. Your legs ache. Your throat is dry. Anya sits beside you, sipping from her flask and staring at nothing in particular. We used to be afraid to drink in public, she says suddenly. My mother would never go to a bar alone. Too dangerous, too shameful. Me? I drink in public because it's dangerous. That way, they know I'm not scared. You look at her. She raises her flask again. To every woman who spilled something in a bathroom stall and called it liberation. You clink your bottle against it. Plastic to metal. Real enough. The street is quiet now, the city's starting to wake up. But you'll carry this buzz a little longer. The taste of sour lime and fake cherry, the heat of the floor, the joy of forgetting who you were supposed to be. Somewhere in that club, the bass still echoes. Somewhere in your bloodstream, the diesel punkt still sings. And you? You're not coming down anytime soon. You wake to the rhythmic creak of a rocking chair and the faint clink of ice in a glass. The sun is just beginning to stretch across the porch, slanting through the screen in long golden bars. It smells like magnolia, hot cement, and the sour-sweet tang of whiskey left open overnight. You sit up slowly, blinking through the haze of sleep, or maybe hangover, and there she is, Lucille, rocking gently, legs crossed, wearing yesterday's house dress and today's lipstick, a glass of bourbon in one hand, a cigarette in the other. It's not even 9 a.m. Sleep okay, sugar? She asks without looking at you. You nod, because you're not sure if your mouth is ready for words. She smiles, then sips. Good. You're going to need it. This is the American South, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, pick your flavour. Sometime between the late 60s and early 80s, depending on who's telling the story. You're in a small town that probably has more churches than gas stations, and everyone knows everyone's business, especially when that business is drinking. Women here are supposed to be genteel, dainty, sweet tea and Jesus and casseroles on call, but Lucille is none of those things. She wears rings on every finger, keeps her bourbon in the freezer, and says bless your heart only when she means it as a threat. Her porch is her sanctuary, and you've been invited into it, which is no small thing. She hands you a glass. Hair of the tub, she says, or just a dog in lipstick, either way, drink it. You do. Slowly. It's bourbon, neat, and it hits like a sermon from a preacher who's just found out his wife's been in the choir loft with the organist. It's angry and warm and honest. You cough, Lucille chuckles. There it is, she says. Your throat just got baptized. Here in the South, women drinking is complicated. Publicly, it's still frowned upon in many circles, especially among older generations and church-going types. The expectation lingers. Don't get loud, don't get drunk, do not get caught. But privately, on porches and kitchens, at book clubs that barely mention books, Southern women have long been drinking in their own way, in their own time. Lucille tells you about her aunt, who used to pour gin into her Coca-Cola can every Sunday after church. Said it helped her stomach, she says with a wink. She meant it helped her tolerate her husband. She tells you about her best friend Thelma, who buried 2 husbands and kept a bottle of peach schnapps in her nightstand. Just for sleep, she said. But everyone knew better. There's a fringe legend of a Southern supper club in the 70s made up entirely of women who called themselves the Mules. They met once a month to eat potluck dinners and drink Kentucky bourbon until someone cried or confessed or both. Their rule, what's said with whiskey stays with whiskey. They never wrote anything down, never gave interviews, never stopped meeting. Some say they still gather, now old and wise and probably drinking stronger stuff. Lucille says she applied twice, got rejected both times. Too much fire, not enough honey, they told her. She took it as a compliment. Southern femininity is steeped in contradictions. Hospitality and steel, sugar and fire. You can wear a lace dress and still drink a man under the table, but don't do it in front of your mama. Unless your mama pours the first glass. You sip again. The bourbon is beginning to behave. Or maybe you are. Lucille lights another cigarette. You know what I hate, she says, exhaling smoke like a ghost telling secrets. When people act like we're weak for needing a drink. Men drink for stress, for celebration, for fun. Women drink and it's like, oh dear, what's wrong with her? She snorts. Everything's wrong with me. That's why I drink. And there it is, the truth, served neat. Academics argue over how Southern women's drinking culture fits into broader narratives, whether it's an act of rebellion, of survival, of conformity with a twist. Some say it reflects the pressures of a patriarchal society, others point to the legacy of Prohibition, which hit the South harder and lasted longer in both law and culture. Dry counties still exist here. Liquor stores close on Sundays. But no law has ever stopped a woman from pouring herself something strong when the lights go out and the lies get heavy. Lucille shifts in her chair and looks out at the street. A jogger passes. She raises her glass. To her, she says, running from something, probably. You laugh. She does too, but it's not mean, it's just observant. The porch gets warmer. Cicadas begin their slow, grinding choir. Somewhere inside, the radio crackles to life with an old Patsy Cline tune. Lucille hums along. Her voice is low, a little gravelly, but she hits every note with the kind of precision that comes from having sung it drunk, sober, heartbroken, and bored. You finish your glass, she pours another. You ever want to tell someone the truth, she says, start with a drink, then let the silence do the rest. You sit together like that for a while, not talking, just rocking, just drinking. The world goes soft around the edges. Eventually you ask her if she ever wanted to leave. Once, she says, packed a bag, bought a ticket, got as far as the bus station. Then I remembered I had 2 kids, a bad back, an unfinished business with the mayor's wife. You don't ask for details. You don't need to. When you finally stand to leave, Lucille hugs you. Smells like smoke and bourbon and Chanel No. 5. Come back any time, she says. Bring something worth spilling. As you walk away down the gravel path, the sun full in the sky now, you realise that her porch wasn't just a place. It was a confessional, a court, a classroom, a bar, and she was the bartender, the preacher, and the judge. It's nearly midnight and the street is humming, not loudly but with that soft pulsing energy that lets you know the city isn't sleeping yet. You're in Tokyo now, nestled in a narrow alleyway glowing faintly with the flicker of paper lanterns and the low hiss of steam from a takoyaki stand. Somewhere in the distance a train rumbles past, but here, the world feels folded in on itself. The entrance is barely marked, just a wooden sign and a red curtain. You duck beneath it and step inside. The room is tiny. 6 stools, maybe 7 if someone's willing to press close. A single shelf lined with tall glass bottles, each with delicate calligraphy brushed across the label: sake, shochu, umeshu. Behind the counter is a woman named Aiko, late 50s, maybe older, with the kind of effortless presence that makes everyone else instinctively lower their voices. She doesn't smile often, but when she does, it sticks in your ribs like poetry. She pours you a drink without asking what you want. You take the cup with both hands, ceramic, warm, full of something that smells faintly floral and sharp. The first sip is smooth, with a heat that rises slowly up your spine. Plum wine, sweet, but not childish. You nod your thanks. Aiko nods back, already busy preparing the next pour for the man 2 stools down. This is a tachinomiya, a standing bar, though this one has stools for regulars and foreigners with tired knees. These spots are tucked into alleys all over Tokyo, their counters run by quietly formidable women like Aiko. You didn't find her bar through a guidebook. You found it through someone who told you, ask for the woman with the blue teapot. And you did, and here you are. Traditionally, Japan hasn't been the easiest place for women who want to drink. Public intoxication is broadly tolerated, as long as you're male. Drunk salarymen passed out on park benches are part of the scenery. But a woman drinking alone? That's something else. That's questioned, watched, judged, at least in polite company. Which is why places like this matter. You sip again. The umeshu is stronger than it seems, stealthy. The man down the bar toasts the room in a slurry of Japanese and English. Aiko doesn't react. She's seen this dance 1,000 times. The woman next to you leans over and says something in Japanese too fast for you to catch, then in English. He drinks like a child pretending to be a samurai. You laugh. She clinks her cup to yours. Her name is Naomi. She works in advertising, smokes too much, and keeps a journal she never lets anyone read. She says this like a challenge. Naomi tells you about her mother, who never drank a drop but made her own umeshu every spring. Kept it in a jar by the rice, she says. Said it was for cooking, but I used to sneak sips before exams. There's a fringe rumour, some call it urban legend. Some say it's true, about a secret club in the 1970s called the Midnight Wives. Made up entirely of housewives, most of them conservative on the surface. They'd meet once a month in borrowed apartments to drink homemade shochu and read erotic poetry to each other. They signed their names in ink made from burnt rice wine. No photos exist, but some say their recipes still pass from hand to hand, folded into bento box notes and wedding toasts. You ask Aiko if she's heard of them. She pauses, pours you something clear and unfamiliar. Try this, she says. That's all. Tastes like licorice and dusk and maybe just a little like a secret kept too long. There's an academic argument, of course there is, about the role of women in Japan's post-war drinking culture. Some historians claim women were mostly absent from bar life until the rise of hostess clubs in the 1960s. Others argue that women were always there, just not where men were looking. The history of the Onasakaya, female-run bars, dates back centuries, but their stories rarely make it into the big picture. Not elegant enough. Not official enough, but here, in this alley, in this room, the real history is sitting behind the counter, wearing soft socks and slicing pickled radish with a knife that's probably older than you. Naomi finishes her drink and lights a cigarette. Do you know what it means? She asks to drink quietly. You shake your head. She exhales smoke toward the ceiling. It means you don't owe anyone an explanation. You understand her now. This isn't a bar for flirting or showing off or pretending. It's for the women who've been told too many times to be polite, to be invisible, to go home. It's for the woman who stays 10 minutes longer than she meant to, and the woman who orders one last pour just because she can. It's for stories told without urgency, for silences that stretch and never turn awkward, for the taste of something warm that carries you across a memory you didn't know you needed to revisit. Eventually, the man down the bar stumbles out, leaving his empty cup behind. Aiko wipes the counter, then refills your drink with the same silent grace she's maintained all night. You bow your head in thanks. She doesn't bow back. She doesn't have to. You ask Naomi how often she comes here. Whenever I need to remember who I am, she says. You think about that as you sip your last glass, about the way this alley, this bar, this woman behind the counter, all of it feels like a room that exists outside of time, not a hiding place, but a holding one. You step outside finally, your head light, your chest steady. The lanterns sway above. The trains are quieter now. Somewhere a vending machine hums into life. You walk back through Tokyo's soft-lit streets, carrying the memory of warm plum wine, a stranger's story, and the echo of a bar that doesn't exist on any map, but always opens for those who know how to ask. So now you're here, lying in bed, maybe your eyes heavy, maybe still wide open. The fan's humming softly in the background, the kind of sound that makes everything feel a little safer, a little slower. You've been to alleys and palaces, kitchens and deserts, moonlit porches and fog-drenched rooftops, and through it all, you've sipped what they sipped. Not just the drinks, but the defiance, the communion, the permission to exist. The world told women to drink quietly, to drink privately, to drink with shame or apology or in the margins. But the truth? They drank with courage, with creativity, with code words and cake recipes and cups disguised as teacups. They drank to remember. They drank to forget. They drank to belong, to resist, to simply be. You've met them, Gin Lane's Edith, barefoot in the soot with a bottle full of fire. The sisters in the forest passing a calabash as the ancestors leaned in. The ladies with lipstick smiles and wine coolers in their purses, dancing like no one would archive it. You've stood on Tokyo's glowing streets after midnight and sipped a plum-soaked silence that held more history than any library. And maybe, after all this, you realize that none of it was really about the alcohol. Not exactly. It was about space. Carved out, stolen, held firm. It was about women saying again and again, you may not see me, but I'm here. So now, as you lay still, maybe with the echo of laughter in your head, or the imagined warmth of a tin cup in your hand, remember this. Long before you and long after you, women found each other in quiet corners and loud rooms and made something sacred in the act of raising a glass. Not to forget, but to be remembered. Cheers to them, and to you for staying, for listening, for letting the story pour out and settle. Good night, dreamer.